Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene was on Tucker Carlson's show last night, and she said that this war in Ukraine is against Russia. This war against Russia, the Chiron below the two of them, Tucker and Margie, was all of the money spent in Ukraine could be spent here helping the American people. Putin must be smiling. On the line with us is our old buddy, the investigative reporter, Greg Palast. He's a journalist, author, filmmaker. His latest film, Vigilante, Georgia's vote suppression hitman, produced by Martin Sheen and George DiCaprio, narrated by Rosario Dawson. And you can watch it for, I believe you can watch it free over at gregpalast.com. Greg_Palast on Twitter. Greg, welcome back to the program. You've been doing a deep dive into Putin's pronouncements. I don't know if you caught it this morning that Medvedev just came out and said, and I quote, this is why it's so important to achieve all the goals of the special military operation, to push back the borders that threaten our country as far as possible, even if they are the borders of Poland.
Yes. Well, by the way, greetings from Switzerland.
Thank you.
If you go to BuzzFlash or gregpalast.com for the updates, you can read the article, Putin's Mein Kampf, an invasion foretold. Look, this guy wrote, what we have, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Silvio Berlusconi, the Italian fascist, Marie Le Pen, Tucker Carlson, the rest of the gang, and unfortunately, a couple of people on the left have gotten the idea that that the problem here is that NATO provoked Russia, and that justified NATO's expansion, provoked Russia and justified this invasion. That's complete nonsense. But the important thing is, what is the reason? Putin actually wrote a 6,800-word essay, a monster, on why he was going to seize and take over all of Ukraine. And it's he put that out in June of 2021. We should have been ready for this because he did it all. And there's not one single mention of NATO. There's only a slight mention of NATO positive, believe it or not. So what's going on here? What's going on, Putin is trying to become Putin the Great, not restore the Soviet Union, but to restore an imaginary empire that was founded in the 10th century called the Kievan Rus Empire, and that Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus are one great and single Slavic nation. The problem was it didn't happen. Who did rule that area from Kiev? Moscow was just a time.
Greg, your audio
back
is
that single.
Your audio is coming and going. I don't know if there's anything you can do on your end to fix that.
Okay, can you hear this now? Can you hear this now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Just let me recap what we missed and what I think you were saying, which is that Putin has been saying that Ukraine and Russia are all part of one ancient Slavic empire going back to the 10th century, but in fact that was not Slavic. It was the Norwegians and the Swedes who controlled that territory. And pick it up from there if I have that right.
Yes, so he has this fever dream. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. He has this fever dream of history, that there was this great Slavic empire and that it was a crime that Ukraine was taken away from the Ruski Mir, the Russian world. And by the way, he doesn't blame NATO. He blames the Bolsheviks. He blames Lenin and the rest because, Ukraine has never, ever in history been a part of Russia. That's a complete misunderstanding that Putin has been very successful in selling. In fact, the Bolsheviks and the always recognized the independent nation of Ukraine, and it had its own seat since the founding of the United Nations. And so there was no such thing. But he wants to recreate this single nation, become Vlad the Great.
Yeah.
And he explains that in this 21-page essay. Are you still hearing me?
I am, and spot on. And I've been saying on this program for months now that he's basically trying to become Catherine the Great. And now I'm no student of Russian history. Apparently, you have become one here, and But is that what's going on? I mean, he's looking back at the people who consolidated empire and thinking that this is his legacy before he died. I mean, the guy's 70 years old. He seems to have health problems. This is the world he wants to leave.
Well, but it's not just any world. It's not just creating a larger Russian Slavic empire that had never existed. The second casus belli, the second reason for invading Ukraine, is to restore the supremacy of the Muscovite Russian Orthodox Church. You have to understand there's a schism. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is split away. And of course, you've got the Greeks, and he's no friend of the Catholics or Muslims either. So he has decided that his main aim is to restore the power of Kirill, who is the source of his own political power. Putin is nothing without the patriarch Kirill in Moscow. And Kirill has lost grip of Ukraine. So the idea is to bring back Russian values and the Russian Orthodox Church values. And he's not concerned about cruise missiles from Poland. He's not concerned. What he's concerned about is homosexuals from NATO. That's one of the big things. If you read his writings, it's all about the traditional Russian family. Kirill is absolutely overwhelmed, as is Putin. They're completely absorbed with the idea that there is this transgender mixing of sexes in the West, which is poisoning and undermining the traditional Russian culture. And that's what he's very concerned about. He's a religious man, and he's really very much the handmaiden. He is not the power in Russia. Kirill, the head of the Orthodox Church there is, and the split away of the Ukrainians, not only religiously, but culturally, is a threat. Yeah, I think that's the threat that they are trying to crush.
I think most Americans have no idea that there's, completely separate from Catholicism, there are these little Orthodox churches around the world that are kind of their own little separate universes with their own equivalents of a papacy. You got the Greek Orthodox Church, you've got the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, you've got the Russian Orthodox Church, you've got the Egyptian Orthodox Church called the Coptics. That I'm very familiar with.
You're a minister, I understand.
I was back in the 70s, so you've got these kind of dueling Orthodox churches, and the Russian Orthodox Church thinks that they should control the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and there was a lot of kind of mixing for a while there, and now the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is saying no, we're our own thing, right? And so Kirill is like, what was the name of the guy who was the Romanov family's religious advisor?
I think it was. I better be careful. I think
Rasputin.
Nemtsov, but I better.
It was Rasputin, wasn't it? I think Kirill
Rasputin.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by P.E. Moskowitz. It's The Case Against Free Speech, the First Amendment, Fascism, and the Future of Dissent. This is from the introduction. This book is not anti-free speech. It is anti the concept of free speech. It's an important distinction. Everyone should have the right to say what they want. I will not argue otherwise. I am not an authoritarian. In this book, I will not argue that the United States should adopt laws banning racist speech like the ones that have proliferated throughout Europe, for example. I think those laws are often counterproductive and end up being used against leftists instead of against racists. I won't argue that Nazi speech should be outlawed as it is in Germany. I won't argue that the First Amendment should be reformed nor more firmly upheld. This book is not about whether the First Amendment is good or bad. This book is about why the First Amendment is nearly irrelevant, except in its power as a propaganda tool. In the following chapters, I will argue that free speech as a concept is meaningless, that it is a dialectical smokescreen more than an ideal to be upheld, that in a grossly unequal society, in which a few corporations control the means of media dissemination and a small group of the ultra-wealthy bankroll entire political movements, there can be no meaningful definition of free speech. On paper, I'm free to speak as a billionaire. I am as free to speak as a billionaire. Yet I do not have the power to change laws through political donations, to influence college curricula, or to quash entire movements for economic liberation. And still, I hold more speech power than most. I am a published author, and my speech is sanctified by the gatekeepers of my publishing house. Therefore, the path to free speech, I will argue, has less to do with a law about speech, or many laws, than with ending racism and inequality. Throughout U.S. history, disparate groups have claimed to cherish free speech more than their enemies. Unionists in the 1920s saw free speech as synonymous with striking and ultimately class revolution. Today, conservatives are the group to most often shroud their politics in free speech, arguing that any silencing or protesting of their speech runs counter to U.S. values of freedom and liberty for all. But as I hope to prove in this book, free speech has never really existed, because freedom and liberty have never really existed for the vast majority of Americans. Instead, the U.S. has systematically acted against those values, suppressing the opportunities, speech, movements, and actions of the masses, especially people of color and anti-capitalists, in order to favor the free flow of capital to the owning class. This oppression and suppression have been constant since the founding of this country, and therefore free speech is a hollow signifier, pointing to a past that never existed. The funny thing about free speech is that it's been used to fight for and against these liberties, both as a guise for the wealthy and powerful to oppress the poor, like the Koch brothers and their supporters using free speech to push through anti-democratic legislation and rip apart campaign finance laws, and as a rhetorical tool for the working class to further their cause, as happened in the early 1900s when leftists argued that free speech includes the freedom to riot, and the ACLU argued it was the only way to prevent a violent revolution. I don't argue that one definition of free speech is more legitimate than the other, but that they are all relatively empty signifiers, hiding more tangible structures of power and ideas underneath them. So why write a book on free speech if I think the term is essentially meaningless? Because the concept holds so much weight in our country. We argue endlessly about whether it's being trampled on, whether college students hate it, whether the government is adequately upholding it, but we rarely ask what free speech is, or how we got to the free speech crisis we supposedly face today. When you scratch the surface of conversations over free speech, you find more difficult issues underneath. It's much easier to talk about the ability of conservatives to speak on college campuses than about the systemic racism, sexism, and transphobia college students experience. And those are the protest campus visits by right-wing conservatives are actually fighting against. It's easier to fantasize about a country that values free speech than to grapple with the fact that we place so much emphasis on free speech while jailing dissidents and allowing tens of millions to live in poverty. What is free speech to someone who works 60 hours a week and has no time nor any platform to use their supposed right? There is relatively little literature and philosophy on free speech, despite the fact that it has been in constant contention since the founding of this country. Even the legal history of the First Amendment is sparse for something so foundational to the values of our country.
A few have seriously grappled with ideas of what free speech does and does not mean, most notably literary theorist Stanley Fish, who has argued that the term does not mean much at all. Leftists like Noam Chomsky have written about free speech tangentially in their explorations of media as a propaganda tool. Most history books on speech are written as hagiographies, unquestioning the intent of the Founding Fathers and their morals, with a few notable exceptions, such as Laura Weintraub's The Taming of Free Speech. I don't intend to fill the yawning gap of research history and philosophy. This is not a definitive account of free speech, but a necessary intervention, prodding.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, fascist-free Tuesday. We don't want to brand Tuesday like that. No, Tuesday's just good all by itself. Hey, welcome to the program. We got a lot to talk about today. Did godless gays cause the Ukrainian war? Is Putin right? This is his new sales pitch. You know, Greg Palast was on the program Friday talking about it. I was writing about it today. I'll share that with you in the first hour here in about 15 minutes. Also, 6 bombshells from new evidence in the Fox News defamation suit. We will start the second hour with that. And are you surprised that the Trump campaign spied on the Biden campaign with help from Rupert Murdoch? Very strange. That in the second hour. Also, the creator of Dilbert killed his career because of a highly flawed right-wing poll analysis. How dumb are these white supremacists anyway? It's just astonishing. We'll get to that in the second hour. In our third hour, Monifa Bandale is going to be with us. The impact of banning mifepristone exposed. This is the abortion drug. Also, how big insurance is profiting massively from Medicare privatization. And, as I said, Trump spied on the Biden campaign with help from Fox News. So a lot to talk about today. But to start out, on the line with us is Julio Rivera, the editorial director of Reactionary Times, contributor to Newsmax, American Thinker, and townhall.com. reactionarytimes.com. Oh, yeah, it's Julio is his Twitter handle. And, oh, yeah, it's Julio. Welcome back to the program. Oh, that's right. Julio's on the phone today, so I've got to put him on the board. My apologies. I'm so used to having you on video. Hey, Julio, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So, congressional Republicans and the Trump administration. This is a quote from the White House, the Biden White House. Owe East Palestine an apology for selling them out to rail industry lobbyists when they dismantled the Obama-Biden rail safety protections, as well as the EPA's ability to rapidly contain spills. This is Andrew Bates, the spokesman for the White House. The Trump administration withdrew a 2015 proposal. Well, the bottom line is that when Obama was president, he had issued rules that could have prevented this, certainly would have minimized it. And Trump, after the Republican Party took $6 million from these railroads, Trump signed an executive order reversing it. After a 10-minute conversation, we now know. How can Republicans possibly defend this, Julio?
Well, I think it's a bigger problem. I've been actually reading, and I was reading in the New Republic, which is actually a liberal-leaning media outlet, about this in advance of our conversation. And I actually learned some pretty interesting things. I mean, there's been more than $750 million thrown into lobbying efforts by the rail industry to Republicans and Democrats since 1998. Yes, the Obama-era rules actually were very good rules. There were great regulations, and I think that they would have had a hand in preventing what wound up happening in East Palestine. But you're talking now, we're 2 years into the Biden administration, and there was actually a conference call a couple of weeks back. Basically, the Ohio governor, Mike DeWine, admits now, that and the congressional delegation from the state that they need more help from the federal government. But Obama, in terms of actually reviving the Obama-era rule, is part of that, mandating the trains carrying hazardous and flammable materials have to have updated electronic brakes. Most of these trains are still operating with Civil War era brakes, which is
the old-fashioned air brakes.
Exactly. Yeah, they're terrible. But basically, when they were asked on the conference call about this, the Biden administration officials deferred. This is according to the New Republic, and anybody can look this up. I'm sure a lot of your listeners follow the New Republic.
So your argument is that the Democrats
No, I haven't gotten to my argument yet.
Okay,
Let me finish, Tom.
Keep going.
But the Biden administration officials deferred, saying that they're hoping for Congress to lead those efforts. And they were citing actually lawsuits that against the Obama era rule. Like basically that they don't want to get into a legal situation. Like they don't want to take this fight up themselves. So it's basically, I don't know how they could defer this, the blame to the Trump administration. They've been in office for over 2 years. Why didn't they fix this?
So your argument is that the disaster, with all these poisonous forever chemicals, and vinyl chloride is a known carcinogen and dioxin, and then they burned this stuff, which produces massive amounts of dioxin, which everybody is figuring is what killed the 44,000 animals in the area that have been documented to have died. That the responsibility for this is with the Biden administration because they didn't act quickly enough to reverse Donald Trump's executive order. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, every administration is responsible. They bear their own fruit. I mean, he took over. He's had more than enough time to address this. And then the rail industry has actually been under the microscope. Obviously, we had the big issue with the workers last year. A lot of these issues should have been addressed in real time since Biden's been president. Why didn't? And this was their rules. I mean, this was supposedly, you framed it as an Obama-Biden era rule in terms of safety rules,
right?
With the brakes, with the updated.
Well, what happened was it was
a great rule. Why didn't he revive it on day one?
Right. The agency that oversees rail safety issued a rule during the Obama administration that said that the railroads had 3 years, 5 years, I forget it, one or the other, to switch from air brakes, these, as you say, Civil War era air brakes, to electronic brakes, which stop 65% faster and far more reliably. And that would have, they would have had to really start investing money. This would have cost the railroads a couple $2 billion, although they have spent billions of dollars in share buybacks to just move that money into the pockets of their executives and investors in the last couple of years. And they're preparing to do, the Norfolk Southern, in fact, is preparing to do it again. They're about to do another $1 billion share buyback. So the Obama administration issued a rule. The Trump administration, Donald Trump, wrote an executive order reversing that rule. And then when it got to the Biden administration, the debate within the Biden administration was, if we go back to issuing rules, essentially, by agency, we're going to have the same problem that the EPA has right now. The Obama administration had also issued a rule, the EPA under the Obama administration, that carbon dioxide was to be considered a pollutant and could be regulated by the EPA. The Supreme Court overturned that last year, saying, no, you can't just issue a rule like that if the law doesn't explicitly say that. You've got to have Congress change this. And so it sounds like what you're saying is that the Biden administration is now saying, well, this will just get overturned by the 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court again, and we'll be back to not having any safe trains if we don't have Congress act on this. And that's what they were going to do, is try to defer to Congress. Do I have all that right?
Not necessarily, but I mean, I think this is really a bipartisan problem that was created. I think this is the bigger issue to me, I think, is that lobbyists have way too much power. Yeah. They're throwing. I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I think lobbying. If you get rid of lobbying, and the way that lobbying is set up right now, I think things would run a lot smoother.
So how do we do that, particularly when?
Unfortunately, they were paying off. Listen, they weren't just paying into Republican campaigns and Republican causes. There's been a lot of money from the rail industry, and it's actually, according to the New Republic, only slightly tilted to Republicans.
Yeah, so the difference, though, is that the Republicans deregulate, and
they're giving a lot of money to progressive Democrats.
Well, yeah, the difference being that Democrats are apparently taking the money but still wanting to regulate the rails, and Republicans are taking the money and saying, okay, we'll do what you want. But in either case, I agree with you. We need to do something about lobbying. We don't have a government of, by, and for we the people anymore. We have a government of, by, and for the lobbyists. and the billionaires and the special interests. Yeah. And this is all thanks to the U.S., to 5 Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court back in 1976 and 78, and then in 2010 with Citizens United. So, as a conservative or a Republican, how would you want to regulate big money? I mean, we actually had laws in place. The Jerry Ford signed into law after the Nixon bribery scandals that would have eliminated an awful lot of the lobbying that's going on right now, and billionaires being involved in large campaigns. And those got blown up by the Supreme Court. What's your solution?
Well, I mean, listen. At the end of the day, I think that we really have to watch, where money is going to. The legislators. This is something you can look at just Congress. People in Congress, look at the corporate boards that they wind up with, on major corporations, after having a 20, 30-year career in Congress. You know what I mean?
Paul Ryan being on the board of Fox News.
Yeah, that's a great example of it. I don't have a problem with that. This is
stop the revolving door. In other words,
politicians on both sides.
Yeah,
doing this.
I'm with you. It's a system that has been badly corrupted. Julio Rivera, a rare moment of unanimity here, editorial director at reactionarytimes.com. Oh, yeah, it's Julio on Twitter. Julio, thanks for dropping by. It's great talking with you.
Hey, anytime, Tom. Have a good one.
Thank you. We'll be right back with Putin's latest rationalization for them is that Ukraine is the conduit for American propaganda that says we should accept gay marriage.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stop gay marriage. He's got to keep bombing the crap out of civilians and hospitals and schools and nurseries in Ukraine. And welcome back. John in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, they're talking about that loan forgiveness thing that's going to be going before the Supreme Court. And the thing is, people need to understand that, they're saying, how can the president do this? Well, Congress gave the president the power for 90 days to wage a war or whatever and spend as much money as he wanted to do it. He has that. I think that's the clause that they might be going under. I'm not too sure, but because we have a citizen soldiers, and we draft from the citizenry who've gone to college and who are the ones who have all these debts and stuff. If you have a soldier that goes into the military, has a high debt, he can be corrupted by a foreign power. Hey, we'll pay your debt if you'll give, we've already had people already do that, give away our secrets and stuff for that already. And that's been recorded already.
I get it that the military is offering, there's the GI Bill, the more recent one, the one from 10, 15 years ago that basically allows the government or, promotes the idea that the government will pay for college for people who serve their country in the military.
But they also draft.
I beg your pardon?
They also draft out of the colleges these people that are in college.
Right. I don't see what's wrong with that. How does that translate into people selling out their country? You lost me there, John.
All right. Say you go to college, and you get a degree for computers and stuff. All right, and you got this debt, this student loan debt hanging over your head. Right. You get a job working for the military. You can have Russia or foreign power come in, and someone say, "Hey, we can take care of that loan debt for you if you give us."
Yeah, but you go to prison for the rest of your life if you did that for espionage. I mean, what insane person would do that?
We've had people. Yeah, but But if you forgive that debt, if we forgive that debt, then they can't use it as a blackmailing tool.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're arguing basically that college debt is one more thing that puts people in a situation where they can be compromised, and therefore we shouldn't be doing it. Is that your argument?
Yeah. You have to lessen the blackmailing technique. And, it's not only for the military; it's also for our own inventions and whatever, corporate espionage and things like that. All these things come in fact, and that's the reason why I'm saying that I think that's the reason why he might be doing it under that. Everybody's saying they don't know how the president can do it, but that would be the only way
I see what you're saying. You're arguing, this is before the Supreme Court right now, today, and you're arguing that the administration could be making the case that forgiving student loan debts is going to make people less vulnerable to betraying their country. Make it a national security argument. I think it's kind of, I think it's thin, but now I understand your logic, John, and I don't think it's crazy. I think, it might, and in this day and age, who knows what'll make a good argument in court before the Supreme Court. John, thank you. Thank you for that. Fascinating. Took me a minute, but fascinating. 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Well, it appears that American business has a cranky right-wing billionaire problem. This is really getting bad. Tesla fired dozens of their workers at their Buffalo, New York plant after the workers sent an email to Elon Musk, the owner, principal owner of Tesla, notifying him that they were going to start unionizing or a campaign to create a union for the company. So he just went and fired them all. Meanwhile, over at Starbucks, the interim CEO, Howard Schultz, another billionaire, is basically telling Bernie Sanders and the committee that he is the chairman of in the United States Senate, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, to go screw themselves. He just said he's not going to do it. He's not going to show up. Bernie says apparently it's easier for Schultz to fire workers who are exercising their constitutional right to form a union than it is to answer questions from elected officials. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is kind of a follow-up on the conversation that Greg Palast and I had on this program on Friday. In fact, I reference Greg in the article and have a hot link to the article that he wrote about it for his website and to the YouTube clip of him and me talking about it on Friday. And it's headlined, this title, "Did Godless Gays Cause the Ukrainian War? Is Putin Right?" One of the main points of my article is that there's already an agreement about the status of Ukraine. It's called the Budapest Memorandum, and it was signed in 1994. Ukraine at that point in time had the third largest stash of nuclear weapons in the world. They were all left over from when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Ukraine is a huge country. It's the size of Texas. It's massive. It's literally the largest country in Europe. And they had all these nuclear weapons, most of them pointed at the United States and European capitals, mostly the United States and London. And so the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, and Ukraine got together and negotiated this deal where the United States would put in $3 billion to help decommission these nuclear weapons and reimburse essentially Ukraine for the expenses associated with it. Russia, the UK, and the US collectively would put up another $3 billion for this process. Russia would pick up the expense of coming into Ukraine, picking up, there was about 1,900 nuclear warheads, picking up 1,900 nuclear bombs, transporting them back to Russia, decommissioning them or doing whatever they want with that, or whatever they did with them. And that in exchange for Ukraine giving up all of the nuclear weapons that they had, which could have been a deterrent against Russian aggression, in exchange for doing that, Ukraine got a solid, sworn, written commitment from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia that Ukraine's borders would be respected, and if any country ever invaded Ukraine, those three countries would come to their defense. It was like a mini NATO. So
the history of this thing is I mean, the backstory of how we got here in the second year of this brutal terrorist war against Ukraine by Russia is absolutely fascinating. And I trace it in the article. By going back to Putin's own statements, speeches, and writings. Back in 2008, he was talking to George W. Bush. And he said, and I quote, this was at a NATO meeting in Bucharest. He said, quote, "You don't understand, George, that Ukraine is not even a state. What is Ukraine? Part of its territory is Eastern Europe, but the greater part is a gift from us." George Bush didn't respond to that. He just kind of brushed it off. 13 years later, in July of 2021, now this was 7 months before Putin invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. So 7 months before the invasion. He doubles down on this argument that Ukraine is not a real country. He published this 21-page screed on the Kremlin's website. You can still read it there, in which he basically said, I'll quote him. He said, "I said that Russians and Ukrainians were one people, a single whole. It is what I have said on numerous occasions and what I firmly believe." And then he goes on to talk about how the separation between Ukraine and Russia, which would be, Ukraine becoming a democratic country, Russia becoming an autocratic country. But he blames it on us. He says, first of all, I'd like to emphasize that the wall that has emerged in recent years between Russia and Ukraine, between what is essentially the same historical and spiritual space, is, to my mind, is our great common misfortune and tragedy. But these are also the result of deliberate efforts by those forces that have always sought to undermine our unity. So right up until a month or so ago, his main argument was, Ukraine's not really a country. Now he's got a new argument. Ukraine is the conduit for pedophilia and gay marriage coming into Russia. And he's got to bomb Ukraine and kill all these civilians in order to stop gay marriage from coming to Russia. I'm not making this up. You can read it all at HartmannReport.com.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Other news going on, the loan forgiveness, Biden's loan forgiveness is before the Supreme Court today, and a new grand jury in Georgia. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break and pick up your calls. It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. In the weeks after 9/11, Rodale Pat Mitchell. It's titled "Becoming a Dangerous Woman: Embracing Risk to Change the World." This is from the preface titled "The Most Dangerous Woman in the Room." Yes, I'll be there. Eve Ensler was calling with an invitation to what she described as the meeting of movements, planned for the first week of January 2017. In the wake of a polarizing presidential election in the United States, Eve had decided it was time for activists to come together to shape strategies that would unify and leverage the collective power of a wide range of social justice organizations. "Who else is coming?" I asked. "I'm not releasing the invitation list," Eve replied, "but you'll want to be in the room." Indeed, I did want to be in that room, knowing from past experiences that any meeting or event that Eve organized would be meaningful. So I showed up, as the invitation indicated, at a nondescript building in Stone Ridge, New York, and surrendered my cell phone to the smiling young volunteer. "Best to have all communication devices outside the room," was the explanation, which of course heightened my anticipation about what would transpire within the room. I entered a large room and saw Eve standing at the front with folding chairs in a circle. Mingling about the room were some familiar faces, the meeting's other conveners, Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, Naomi Klein, award-winning author and activist, independent media entrepreneur and journalist Laura Flanders, and Jane Fonda, actor and activist. We were asked to find our seats, and Eve began. "We are living in dangerous times," was her opening line, "and such times call for new levels of activism from all the communities represented in this room. Let's begin by identifying who's in the room." One by one, the introductions began. "I'm one of the founders of the Women's March. I'm the executive director of 350.org. I run Project South." With each introduction, the level of leadership and activists' credentials became more impressive and, for me, more intimidating. I could feel my anxiety building. How was I going to identify myself? I have no title and was no longer running an organization, having left my CEO position at the Paley Center for Media the previous spring. I could say that I was the CEO of Pat Mitchell Media with its grand total of 2 employees, including myself, but that felt wholly inadequate to explain why I belonged in that room. I mentally rehearsed some other options. I could say I was a lifetime advocate for women, true enough, if a little vague. I could list some of my previous titles, but why make a point of being the former anything? I was struggling to come up with how to identify myself in the present, an identity that would hopefully give some indication of why Eve had included me in this circle of activists and leaders. Finally, it was my turn. Before I knew it, I heard myself saying, "I'm Pat Mitchell, and I'm a dangerous woman." I'm not sure exactly what prompted this personal declaration of dangerousness, but I could tell from the looks of surprise that I needed to add a bit more context. At this time in my life, about to turn 75, I continued, I have nothing left to prove, less to lose, and I'm ready to take more risks and to be less politic and polite. As Eve said, these are dangerous times, and dangerous times call for dangerous women. That got a big sisterly yes from Eve and others in the circle, including Jane Fonda, who was sitting across from me and stood up declaring, "Well, I'm older than my friend Pat, so that makes me even more dangerous." Laughter erupted, of course, and I could sense that others were contemplating exactly what becoming more dangerous to meet the challenges of dangerous times would mean for each of us and for the work we had convened to consider. Certainly, Jane Fonda's life of activism is a textbook case for being bold and brave. During our many years of friendship, I've witnessed her willingness to take risks for a good cause, to speak out and show up, even when it meant personal peril or sacrifice. At 81, she is still on the front lines, campaigning for domestic and restaurant workers' rights, standing with the American Indian communities, protesting natural resource exploitation at Standing Rock, and busier as an actor than ever. In her book, Prime Time, Jane advanced the idea that older women have the potential to become the most powerful population on the planet. She's a great example of how we embrace that potential at every age. My personal potential for becoming dangerous is perhaps more directly linked to my friendship with Eve Ensler. From our first conversation in war-torn Sarajevo in 1998, I've been deeply inspired by her courage and her commitment to do whatever is necessary to end violence against women everywhere. Taking risks comes easier to Eve than to many. Writing and performing the Vagina Monologues, making it the centerpiece of a global movement, V-Day, to end gender-based violence, is a transformative approach to activism that I feel privileged to have experienced. Yes, I was an activist and women's advocate before I met Eve, but through my relationship with her and as a board member of the V-Day movement, I've met activists facing dangers every day to create change in some of the most difficult places on earth to be a woman. But until that day, I had not felt dangerous myself. Declaring myself a dangerous woman still feels a bit, well, dangerous. And I readily admit to some second thoughts about declaring it even more widely and boldly as the title of this book. But every day since that convening, I'm discovering more about what being dangerous means in my life and why I believe that it's time for us, women and the men who stand with us, at whatever age or place in life's journey, to embrace risks and engage with renewed passion and collective purpose in making the world a safer place for women and girls. Pat Mitchell, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Just a couple of quick news hits here. Joe Biden's plan to forgive $10,000 to $20,000 per student, depending on their income, of student loan debt has been enjoined by a lawsuit from, I think it's about 24 Republican states. I believe it's the state's attorneys general who are doing this, who are running this lawsuit. The Republican State Attorneys General Association has become a huge political organization, well-funded by right-wing billionaires. And they brought this case before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is hearing arguments on it this morning. The Republicans are saying that it's wrong for the government to help students out with their debt. And of course, the Biden administration is saying, we have every right to do this. In fact, we really there shouldn't have been student debt in the first place. We should be like every other democracy in the world and let, young people go to college for free or close to it, at an affordable cost, like the United States was up until the Reagan administration. Reagan, of course, ended college in California, the University of California system, the entire system, which was one of the top colleges in the world, was entirely free, 100% free. Back in the 60s, I had a bunch of friends in Michigan who now live in California, have, ever since the 60s, because they moved out there to go to college for free. And that was just to avoid, $250 a month or a quarter in tuition at MSU. But anyhow, so that's before the Supreme Court today. Keep an eye on that case. Probably within a few hours. I doubt by the end of the show, but I'll be able to let you know tomorrow. Based on the kinds of questions the members of the court are asking, you might have a sense of how they're going to rule. It's going to be fascinating, number one. And number two, you had this special, Fani Willis in Georgia, the district attorney for Fulton County, Georgia, which is, large, most of metro Atlanta. She pulled together a special investigative grand jury. It was a grand jury that does not have the power to indict. It did have the power to subpoena witnesses and to compel testimony, but they did not have the power to indict. And so it could merely make recommendations. And the foreperson of that jury, a young woman who, according to Republican websites and blogs and whatnot, has like a Facebook page with New Age stuff on it. Oh, my God. She has revealed to multiple media outlets that they recommended to District Attorney Willis that at least a dozen people be indicted for crimes, including Donald Trump, around the efforts to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia. There's been a lot of hand-wringing about that and concern that she might have, blown the thing up if an indictment actually happens. I think that's misplaced. The judge has come out and said that she didn't say anything that was beyond his grand jury instructions. But, excuse me. But the important thing is that grand jury did not have the power to indict. A regular grand jury does have the power to indict. And a new one is being impaneled as we speak in Atlanta for Fani Willis, for Fulton County. And the evidence that was gathered by the special grand jury will now be presented to the regular grand jury, the indicting grand jury, to decide or to actually make indictments. And that could come down anytime this week. I would be astonished if it came down today because it's going to take quite a while. It's probably going to take a couple days to present the information. It's going to take a couple days for the grand jury to digest it. They may want to call in a few additional witnesses. I mean, this could take a few weeks. But many of the legal commentators who are, very much on top of this stuff are speculating that we'll probably know by Friday of this week. So I just wanted to put those things on your radar screen. I think they're really worth paying attention to. And let's pick up some of your phone calls here. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom. Hey, I was interested in performance bonds with the railroad, but you were talking about the education deferments in front of the Supreme Court. If you just, like a true conservative, would find that an educated population is a good investment, right?
You would think.
Yeah, and that, like you're saying, free education, available in education, is a very important investment.
Right.
And so to actually stifle colleges, if all of a sudden these deferments get cut, then all of a sudden a whole bunch of the population is trapped into onerous debt.
Or at least
now,
another 10,000.
Conservative. Yeah. And a true conservative would certainly be interested in onerous debt and the future ability for a nation to hang together if it's saddled with onerous debt. So, is this a true conservative Supreme Court? If they're even asking questions about whether or not it's a good idea to keep a nation trapped in stifling education and onerous debt.
Yeah, no, it's not a true conservative court. It's a bunch of Republican hacks. I mean, come on.
Corporate.
David.
I usually say it corporate state hacks, but yeah. Well, the other thing, too, and since you're on in Chicago, WCPT, greetings, the Chicago train yards are, that's got to be one of the biggest links that Norfolk Southern has. Now, if they were to demand performance bonds from Norfolk Southern, if they've got 700 derailments last year alone, and they've got this one where they're playing it on the cheap, what's Chicago look forward to with Norfolk Southern?
Or any other railroad? I mean, they're not that much of an outlier. Performance bonds, by the way, for people who don't know what we're talking about, and correct me if I have this wrong, David, are where the agency puts up essentially money or an insurance policy or the equivalent of it that says if we fail to perform, then you get to keep this money, or we have to pay you this money. And the performance in this case would be safely transporting goods, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Much less the cost of dealing with a gas explosion in downtown Chicago.
Yeah.
It's bad enough out in the country where it's going to poison a city a couple of 100 miles away, but in downtown Chicago, one of the largest cities in America, they better have some performance bonds like this afternoon.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, I don't think that they do. By the way, you mentioned Chicago. Chicago today is having an election for their mayor. This is keep an eye on this too. This is going to be fascinating. I am no expert on Chicago politics, so I'm going to stop right there. But I think it's fascinating. And I have been a fan of Lori Lightfoot, but we'll see where this goes. David, you raised some really interesting questions. I think the bottom line is, frankly, what Julio and I were talking about, or ended up talking about, is that we've been corrupted by big money. Our government is being corrupted by big money, and it's happening because the U.S. Supreme Court legalized it, and after Congress repeatedly made it criminal. And those laws, over 1,000 laws regulating money in government, have been struck down by the Supreme Court since 1976, and both federal and state. Say what?
A true conservative would look at government is run as a nonprofit. The cost of getting the dam built or the bridge built or the libraries running without roofs leaking, it's the true costs rather than making a profit on it.
Yeah, I know.
And the idea that the Supreme Court is trapped for years in this idea that government, like a business, has any kind of logic to it, that's guaranteeing that you're going to hate the government if it's being run as a business.
Well, that's the goal. I mean, if you're a right-wing billionaire and you don't want to pay taxes that might, help educate poor people's kids or pay for roads for poor people's neighborhoods or working class people's neighborhoods, then, of course you want people to hate and tear down government, which is really the tragedy that, like I said, the Supreme Court has empowered. David, thank you for the call. And then, thoughtful comment or commentary there. Pat in LaPorte, Indiana. Hey, Pat, what's up?
Hi, Tom. We've talked before about electric vehicles. And I tried to get through yesterday when you were kind of talking about, the future of clean energy. But you're a popular guy, so I wasn't able to get through. But I just read an article about Indiana, and I'm really excited. Aspire, A-S-P-I-R-E, is a project that's been going on for about 2 years. And they're researching the use of concrete that will emit electrical charge as you drive over it.
Oh, yeah.
And they're into the testing phase now. They're testing a section of a highway just outside of West Lafayette because Purdue University is involved. And I'm just really excited because, we've owned our electric car for over a year now. Love it. Would like to have all electric vehicles except for my Corvette. And I'm telling you, it's the way to drive in the future.
Oh, yeah. Can you imagine if it was inexpensive? And I'm guessing that day will come Like with old vintage cars, you can buy trashed cars from the 1930s and 40s, and there are these retrofit programs, and there's even companies that do this. Relatively small boutique companies that will put a modern engine in an old car, so it's reliable. But
right, or take your body off and put it on the drivetrain of an electric.
Yeah, well, can you imagine if somebody offered, a service of taking your Corvette and electrifying it and just pull the motor out, put a battery in there, put motors on the wheels, and off you go. I mean, I don't know if it's.
Oh, it would be wonderful.
It would be. Corvettes are great cars to drive.
We have a little Nissan Leaf, and I'm telling you, it is so much fun to drive, and it costs $7.36 on our NIPSCO bill. To fully charge it from 0 to 100%.
Right, which gets you how far? What kind of range?
About 240 miles.
Wow. So you're paying the equivalent of about 30 cents a gallon for gasoline.
Yeah, and I just love it because I don't even use my brakes, so I'm not even putting, brake dust into the air.
Well, on an electric car, when you hit the brake pedal, the first 7/8 of an inch of pressure on the brake pedal is causing the motors to actually, draw power out of the wheel, draw kinetic energy out of the car and convert it back into electricity and recharge the battery.
Right. So. I drove to the grocery store yesterday, which is about 10 minutes away, and I used 1% of power.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so cool. But the concrete that they're researching, they're even putting it in parking garages so that an electric car could park above that section of concrete.
Yeah, this is
not even have to plug in to charge.
It's called inductive coupling, and it's the same thing that now you get with your iPhones. I'm guessing other kinds of phones do it, where you just set it on the charger. Yeah, that's the future, Pat. Pat, thank you for that.
Oh, looking forward to it. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you for the call and the heads up. It's 47 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Talk Media for the sane among us. Back with your calls in just a sec. And welcome back. Jacob in Portland. Hey, Jacob, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's on your mind today?
Oh, thank you. I listened to the Budapest, kind of the history that you were given earlier, the Budapest Amendment, or the
Accords.
Memorandum.
Memorandum, yeah.
Accord. Yeah, that was great. I love hearing the history of stuff like that. And it's going to roll right into the question I had. But how does the Minsk Agreement and the Minsk II protocols filter into this scenario, though? And then ultimately my question being, we spent $120 billion arming Ukraine, and these Palestinians were told to go back to their home.
Yeah, well,
why haven't they done anything?
I don't think it's a great Republican talking point, Jacob, and you get points for that. But
I'm not a Republican, though.
Well, you're doing a great job with their talking points, trying to conflate, Palestine.
Hang on. And I do blame Donald Trump. I totally blame Donald Trump for the derailment.
Yeah.
But the rail union workers tried to strike for the safety things, and Biden administration stopped that strike.
Well, he also gave them most of what they wanted. They didn't get the sick pay that they wanted, but they got several $1,000s a year in pay increases, and they got some safety increases. We had the president of the union, the rail union, on this program, Jacob. But, the Minsk agreements do not give Russia the permission to start bombing Ukraine. There's nothing in Minsk I or Minsk II that says Russia can start bombing or invading Ukraine. Nothing, anywhere, period.
Well, according to UN statistics, there were 15,000 civilians killed during this time.
This is not about statistics. You are asking about the agreements, and the agreements are unambiguous. They do not give Russia the permission to take another country. It's just they just don't have it. So thanks a lot for the call. Good try, Jeff. Jeff, you're listening to WCPT. Let me put you on hold, and I'll pick you up when they're back live again. Gregory in Ventura. Hey, Gregory, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. It's been a while. Well, I just wanted, I'll proceed quickly. I attended University of California, Berkeley. I was a freshman in 1964 at Cal from 64 to 66, then finished up at UCLA with a degree in 68 in film. In 64, it was $84 a semester for California residents. My friends who were from out of state, it was $750. But $84, then was low, but I don't know what that would convert to today.
It would be, you can pretty much, if you're trying to translate dollars from the 1960s to today, you can pretty much just add 10 to the end. Like my dad bought a house and for $15,000 and it's now worth about $90,000, but he bought that in the 50s actually, more or less. You just add a zero. So $84 would have been $850, more or less.
Gotcha. So what I just wanted to let you know, it wasn't free, but it was kind of like free because it wasn't. I come from a fairly well-to-do family. I mean, not super rich or anything, but like middle class. Mm-hmm. And so the $84 and being a California resident was quite reasonable, and no problem if you had the proper grades and SAT minimum score. They actually had to accept you. To the University of California.
Yeah, and it didn't take long to establish residence, by the way. My friends who were moving out there, I think it was 3 months, if I recall right.
Yeah. Well, I'm a native Angelino. I was born in California. But a lot of people have come to California. But it was almost free, but it wasn't totally free.
Yeah, okay. Point made. Thank you, Gregory. Appreciate the call. We'll be right back. It's 51 minutes past the hour. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. Wondering what this new legislative session the next 2 years are going to bring us with Republicans in charge of the House of Representatives? Well, Congressman Bill Pascrell put together a list that kind of summarizes what we should expect. 100% of the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against cheaper gas for Americans, voted against cheaper insulin for Americans, voted against cheaper prescription drug prices, 100% voted against child tax credits, 100% voted against stimulus checks, 100% voted against the Voting Rights Act. They voted 100% voted against ending gerrymandering. They voted 100% against ending climate change, 100% voted against prosecuting rich tax cheats, 100% voted against saving Roe v. Wade. 99% voted against banning assault weapons or fighting domestic terrorism. The list goes on. I've got an entire video all about the entire list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 53 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. And there we go. Jeff in Gurnee, Illinois. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? I've talked to you before. I'm a locomotive engineer, worked 30 years with one of the major companies. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people right away, they're blaming Trump. Well, he didn't allow the right brake system to go in. There's a lot more to that than the way these trains run. Part of the problem, as we know we've talked about before, precision schedule railroading cut a lot of people out of all positions, including the carmen that inspect the cars. So what you're having here is everyone's saying, well, that the train would have stopped faster. Talk about that for a second. First of all, when that train was going along, he was in the process of slowing down for a train ahead. If anyone wants to read into that, they can find that. The problem is, depending on how the train's made up, if they've got a lot of heavy cars in the back, and I can tell you this from running these trains, if the train's going to go and you're going to have a problem with an axle that you may not know right away. Once the train starts the derailing process, if a hose breaks, the train's going to go into emergency. That's going to stop the train, like it's going to put maximum pressure to the brakes, but now we've got sliding wheels. We don't have wheels that are adhering, so I know that's kind of hard to think about.
No, I get it. The wheel's no longer grabbing the rail because it's no longer on the rail.
Well, now that's one part. But the cars that are still on the rail, when the brakes are applied in that manner in what they call an emergency situation, whether it's because the train breaks in path 2 or whether it's initiated by the engineer, now the brakes are actually sliding. But you've got a problem too sometimes when the back of the train is heavy. The people that were putting that particular train together it's a regular scheduled train, by the way, even they gave it all sorts of bad nicknames about how terrible a train it was. If the train's too heavy in the back and the train breaks and the front is starting, everything goes into, let's say, an emergency situation, that back end is coming in today. But by that time, cars are already on the ground. I had a derailment once that happened at 10 miles an hour going into a yard. And when I look back, and it was something with the track that time, which I was going to say very few times is it the rail.
Right.
But when I went back and looked in a 9 mile an hour accident, they were tipped upside down. They were standing on ends. Very similar, not exactly like what you see here. So what you've got is when you cut out these car inspectors, they're used to have a couple minutes to look at each train, each individual car in a yard before it gets switched onto the main line. So if a 100-car train has 400 axles and a 200-car train has 800 axles, that's the point of where it's not so much the rail. Even though rail can cause derailments, a lot of times it's axles. These guys aren't having enough time to inspect the trains, and that's a lot of axles. So
did you see the video of the sparks flying off this train before it derailed?
I did see some of that, and what you're getting there is possibly have a wheel flaw or a wheel that locked up,
or a bearing that's gone.
Once that happens, right? It's probably going to go off the rails, and no matter what the braking system, and I completely understand the electronic brakes, it's a big retrofit because every car has to be retrofitted.
Well, and they also work like anti-lock brakes in a car, so whereas with your air brakes, it's all or nothing basically. In an emergency situation when the hose breaks.
Right. Well, here we go. Anyway, it was different than that. The brakes they came up with that everyone keeps talking about would not have prevented the accident. Once the train's going into the dirt, it's in.
Yeah, I got that.
The brake's not going to really help at that point.
Jeff, thank you. Thanks for your expertise, and thanks for calling in, and thanks for listening to WCPT. I appreciate it. We'll continue the conversation, and hey, surprised that Trump spied on the Biden campaign with help from Fox News? Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, there are ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Tyranny, From Plato to Trump, Fools, Sycophants, and Citizens by Andrew Fiala. This is from the preface. It starts out with a quote from Mary Wollstonecraft from her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Quote, tyrants would have cause to tremble if reason were to become the rule of duty. We recently witnessed the failure of a would-be tyrant who attempted to subvert the rule of law and overturn the result of a democratic election. The American system was pushed toward a cliff, but constitutional guardrails slowed things down. Conscientious people pumped the brakes, and the system held. This was a lesson of tyranny averted. We should take stock and learn what worked and what needs improvement in our system and in our souls. And while the American crisis of 2020-2021 was frightening, a broader historical perspective helps. The threat of tyranny is common, but the cure is well known. It involves virtuous citizenship and a stable constitution. The tyrant's rise and fall is an old story. Consider, a plague descended on the nation as the tyrant ranted and raved, refusing to admit that he was the cause of the nation's ills. The tyrant lived in a fantasy world of his own creation. He refused to accept what was said by those who spoke truth to power. Instead, he listened only to those who flattered his ego and encouraged him in his delusions. The nation suffered profoundly under the tyrant and his plague. He tried to blame the plague on some other scapegoat. Members of the public were seduced by the tyrant and his sycophants to sacrifice everything on behalf of a lie. Violence erupted. When the awful truth was finally revealed, the chorus reached a tragic conclusion. Our lives were mere shadows, and then there's a block of poetry here. Our lives were mere shadows, happiness fades away to nothing. The tyrant's fall reminds us that no human creation lasts forever. Plague and trouble make victims of us all. This is from Oedipus, the Tyrant, lines 1190. This is the story of Oedipus. It is also the story of Donald Trump. The players in this tragedy are found throughout history. They are the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic masses. The tyrant rages, the sycophants simper, the masses cheer and howl, fight and die. As the plague spreads, good things fall apart and decency suffers. This tragedy brings with it the risk of despair. The good news is that the cure for this disease is well known. It is, as Mary Wollstonecraft suggested, reason. Life in general must be made reasonable. This means we need a reasonable constitution as well as wise and virtuous citizens. Wisdom and virtue work together to prevent tyranny. Plato and Aristotle knew this, as did John Adams. Adams wrote in his diary when he was Vice President of the United States, quote, "Tyranny can scarcely be practiced upon a virtuous and wise people." But wisdom, virtue, and reason are often lacking. Wollstonecraft, I've got my Marys wrong. This is Wollstonecraft, I'm sorry. Wollstonecraft laments the fact that, quote, "tyranny in whatever part of society it rears its brazen front will ever undermine morality." Tyranny is not only a political problem, it is also a moral and spiritual one. It afflicts our souls as well as churches, businesses, and family life. Wollstonecraft's important contribution was to argue that for the liberation of women in an era when women were oppressed by the tyranny of patriarchal families. Wollstonecraft was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson and other thinkers of the 18th century Enlightenment. Despite their claims to enlightenment, the heroes of this tradition suffered from moral blindness, as we all do. Jefferson's words inspired a revolution against the tyrant King George III. The words inscribed in the Jefferson Memorial state, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." But Jefferson owned slaves, one of the more obvious forms of tyranny in the world. We must all be careful of our blind spots. Reason aims to shed light by holding up a mirror. The remedy for tyranny is philosophical self-examination. This is an ongoing process, not a panacea. Each generation must seek to make progress on their path to enlightenment. The good news is that we have made progress. Women were liberated and slavery was abolished. The idea that wisdom and virtue can cure tyranny predates the Enlightenment by over 2,000 years. It was the solution proposed by the ancient Greeks, who gave us the very language we will employ here. Words such as tyranny, sycophancy, democracy, and political philosophy. The Greeks emphasized the need for virtue among the players in the political drama. Modern thinkers built upon this and emphasized the need for a rational system of government that prevents tyranny. Tragedy is avoided when leaders and citizens are virtuous and when a stable constitutional system guarantees individual rights, divides power, and creates checks and balances. We have known the cure for thousands of years, but the disease is genetic. Every generation or so, the conditions conspire to bring together an ugly cast of characters that includes the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic fools who cheer him on. The book, Tyranny from Plato to Trump, by Andrew Fiala.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Still a lot to talk about today. By the way, we were talking about the rail derailment in the last hour, and Congressman Ro Khanna, who has not yet announced that he's running for the United States Senate from California. We'll see if he does. I would love to see Ro Khanna in the race. But anyhow, he joined Progressive Democratic Representative Chris DeLuzio of Pennsylvania. Ro Khanna represents California, or the Silicon Valley area of California in the House, to put into place the Decreasing Emergency Railroad Acts Locally Act, the Derail Act, reclassifying what is a highly hazardous cargo on a train. Excuse me. The goal, of course, being to increase safety. There's been a new release of revelations from Fox So-Called News by the Dominion Voting Systems Company. The first revelation came along when they filed their lawsuit and Fox News challenged it, and so they had to provide documentation to say, no, this is actually a legitimate claim that we should be heard by a court. And so they submitted a bunch of evidence, and that included, these conversations, these back-channel conversations among Fox News hosts, particularly Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, and Laura, what's her name? And in some cases, even Jay Wallace, the president of Fox News and whatnot. And the argument, or the weirdness, was that all of these hosts were saying to each other in private, in text messages and in email messages, we know that Trump lost the election. We know that Trump and Rudy Giuliani are lying. We know that Sidney, what's her name, the lawyer, Powell, that's right, Sidney Powell, the lawyer, is just lying through her teeth and probably nuts. Her sole source, Sidney Powell's sole source for claiming the election was stolen, was a letter that a woman wrote in which she claimed that she knew the election was stolen because she was psychic. And she talked to dead people. The Fox News hosts knew this. And they're calling her a whack job, and they're saying, Trump needs to shut the F up, and, And then the word came down from Rupert Murdoch and friends, and this is just, in the days after the election, that Newsmax was going to embrace Trump's stolen election theory, and if Fox doesn't do the same, we're going to start losing viewers. They're going to go to Newsmax. And this could alter the profitability of the network. Well, now what we're learning, now there's been a second release of documents. This was yesterday. A second release of documents, and the second release of documents is from the senior management at Fox News. The president of Fox News, for example, Jay Wallace, right after the election, 2 weeks after the election, said, and I quote, "The North Koreans do a more nuanced show than Lou Dobbs." Lou Dobbs is no longer with the network, by the way, but he was one of the main people out there, promoting what turned into January 6th. And then Chairman Rupert Murdoch said, these theories are, quote, crazy. But then Rupert Murdoch, this is from yesterday's revelations, Rupert Murdoch instructed the president of Fox News to help Trump, quote, any way we can. This was on November 16th. Murdoch also emailed Fox News President Suzanne Scott with a warning about Newsmax. He wrote, These people should be watched if skeptically. Trump will concede eventually. Now, this is before January 6th, keep in mind. Trump will concede eventually, and we should concentrate on Georgia, helping any way we can. Now, this is what he's talking about there is the upcoming Georgia election where John Ossoff and Reverend Warnock were elected, against two Republicans. He said, we should concentrate on Georgia, helping any way we can. We don't want to antagonize Trump further, but Giuliani, taken with a large grain of salt, everything at stake here. In other words, keep spinning the lies here, and don't worry about, Trump, because he's going to give in. Well, he didn't give in. Instead, he led an attack against the United States Capitol and an effort to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House. And then you've got these Jackie Heinrich. This was on November 12th, on the night of November 12th. There was a group chat between Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham. And what had happened was earlier that day, Jackie Heinrich, who is a reporter on Fox News, Trump had tweeted that Dominion voting systems hacked the election. And she responded to his tweet, a Fox News reporter, with a tweet that said, and I quote, "There is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or in any way was compromised." And she was right. To this day, there's no evidence of that, at least in the last elections. So Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham get together to talk about this, and Tucker Carlson says, please get her fired. Seriously, what the F? I'm actually shocked. It needs to stop immediately, like tonight. It's measurably hurting the company. The stock price is down, not a joke. Now think about that for a minute. A host on a major network, the site, saying that when one of their reporters tells the truth, it's hurting the stock price of their company. What does this say Fox News is in the mind of Tucker Carlson? When Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell did their deranged press conference, Murdoch sent an email saying this is really crazy stuff and damaging. And yet, Fox went with it. Carried it, didn't criticize it. The three hosts, the three primetime hosts, Laura, Sean, and Doughboy Tucker, it's all good. Meanwhile, Carlson on November 18th writes to Laura Ingraham, Sidney Powell is lying, by the way. I caught her. It's insane. Ingraham replies, is a complete nut. No one will work with her. Ditto with Rudy. Our viewers are good people, Carlson replies, and they believe it. Well, yeah, they do believe it. And so Murdoch texts the president of the network, and he says, terrible stuff, damaging everybody, I fear. But they kept up the lies. It's just absolutely breathtaking. And then we find the real bombshell that came out yesterday. And that is that, and this literally just came out yesterday. And that is that Fox News management, in this case, it was a member of the board of directors, Paul Ryan, told Rupert Murdoch and Lachlan Murdoch, quote, these conspiracy theories are baseless. Fox News should not be spreading conspiracy theories. But instead, what happened was we discovered that Rupert Murdoch himself, the CEO of the company, or the chairman of the board of the company, gave the Trump White House advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, quote, confidential information about Biden's ads along with debate. Now, you'll recall, back 6 years ago, when Donna Brazile was with CNN, she gave a couple of the questions that they were going to ask during the debate between Trump and Hillary, apparently to a Democrat, and it got back to Hillary's campaign. And Donna Brazile lost her job over this. And the Republicans lost their, you know what? I mean, they just went totally nuts. Oh, my God. Well, is anybody losing their job over at Fox News over this? No, of course not. This is, as Rupert described it, quote, my friend Jared Kushner called me saying this is terrible, and I could hear Trump's voice in the background shouting. This is when he provided Kushner with the ad and the inside skinny that they had on Joe Biden's debate preparations. before the debate. And Kushner is calling Rupert Murdoch himself to get inside information about the Biden campaign. And in the background, Donald Trump is yelling. And nothing's happening? I'm just, just amazed. 6 bombshells from new evidence in the Fox News defamation. Up next, Scott Adams is complaining about cancel culture? No, I don't think so.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
As Dino Badala says, it's consequence culture, not cancel culture. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break. And welcome back. Robin in Portland, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Robin, what's up?
Well, I wanted to disagree with you about the golden rule.
Okay, go for it.
I actually, when I think about it, the golden rule is pretty self-serving. You're going to give something to somebody that you want.
Well, you're going to treat them the way that you would
different.
want to be treated, I think. It's...
Well, I get that, but
do unto others is not give unto others. It's do unto others. So it's treatment, not gifts.
Yeah, okay, but what if they need something different than what your perspective is? There is a platinum rule, and it says, do unto others as they would do unto themselves, which is more focused on the person, on the other person. What do they need, and how can I support them? Not what do I need, and how can I give what I need to someone else?
Well, it doesn't have the juice of being biblical, but I like it.
I know, yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it.
But it's caused me to look at things differently. Mm-hmm. To actually consider another person and not just jump right in there and say, I've got the answer for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the first rule in relationships. This goes back to the, it's been years since we talked about this on the air, but the idea that you should ask people that you're in relationships with how they know that you love them. What is it that you do that makes them know in that moment that you love them, whether it's your kids or your spouse or whatever. And they'll typically tell you things that surprise you. I mean, one of my kids told me that it was when I taught her things. Another one of my kids said that it's when you hug me. My wife, I thought she would say when you hug me, or are affectionate towards me, and instead she said it's when you have coffee with me in the morning. And so so I started trying to do those things, and suddenly things got a lot better. So
yeah, I like that. Well, that's just something I've been thinking about, and it's caused me to shift my thinking. So
okay, well, good one, Robin. Thank you very much for that. Vicki in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Vicki, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hey, yesterday you had a caller call in asking you for a reason not to vote for Trump as a strategy to offer a weak candidate for the GOP against the Democratic presidential candidate.
It was Julio, I think, or Jesus. I forget. In any case, yes, go ahead.
Well, my answer would be, a Fox so-called News will continue to broadcast Trump's disruptive lies as long as voters for Trump numbers are there that indicate that.
Well, they've largely stopped that, actually.
Audience.
They're still complaining about the election, but they're doing it mostly to justify voter suppression laws. But they're not talking about Trump anymore because of this lawsuit.
Right. But come when we have our primaries and the numbers are there, they're going to go back to a very easy way for them to promote themselves by, trying to get that audience. And this will just continue to fuel the divisiveness amongst, our fellow citizens.
Right.
So we just need Trump to go away. So to give him votes only gives the people that don't really want to do news.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. And I'm very wary of strategic voting like that. I'm very, the law of unintended consequences and all that. Vicki, thank you. Excellent point. 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Picking up your calls, Mark in Portland. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. You know, you were mentioning before about the student loan debt that's being challenged by the Republican lawyers across many states. I mean, there's one central question that this affects both this case and the other case revolving the birth control pill or the abortion pill that's going to be challenged in court also. What is the injury? You know, that is the basic tenet question. And I think in terms of the litmus test of who is being injured by this is really critical in terms of, because Republican lawyers, are they really being injured, or who are they representing that's being injured by challenging Biden's student loan forgiveness?
That's a good question. What is the tort here? Do you have any idea what the injury is that they're claiming as the basis for their lawsuit? I don't.
I have no idea. I mean, it's never been explicit. I mean, and the same with the birth control or the abortion pill.
Yeah, the abortion pill.
Because it's been on the market for 20 years, has there been any case study that this has been adversarial to women?
No, in fact, there's a massive body of evidence that suggests that more people die every year in the United States as a percentage of people who take the drug from Tylenol than die or are injured by mifepristone. It's actually safer than Tylenol. Now that said, I mean, Tylenol is not the safest over-the-counter drug out there. If you mix it with alcohol, you do serious damage to your liver. But mifepristone has a great track record. Great question, Mark. I don't know the answer. If anybody does, please give us a shout. Mark, thank you for that. MAGA, by the way, and I'll get back to your calls in a minute or two here, but I passed over a story that I was going to share with you. And that has to do with Scott Adams, the guy who created the Dilbert comics. I always enjoyed reading Dilbert. I mean, you know, Scott Adams has got a dry wit to him. But apparently, we've known for some time that he was a little weird, or at least for a couple of years, 3 years. Back in 2020, he had a TV show. It was an animated primetime TV series called Dilbert. And when the network, UPN was the network, when they canceled the show because of low ratings, by the way, Scott tweeted, quote, "I lost my TV show for being white. Decided it would focus on an African-American audience. That is the third job I lost for being white." And in reality, as I said, you know, it was the show was canceled because it had crappy ratings. But Scott Adams went on this rant last Wednesday on his YouTube show, Real Coffee with Scott Adams. And I think that, you know, the depth, the dimensionality of what he said has not been adequately reported in the media. And I just wanted to share it with you. And Dean Obeidallah is my colleague, Obeidallah, excuse me, and my colleague at SiriusXM. We're often on each other's shows. He's on Sirius channel 127 here, the one I'm on right now, the Progress channel. He's on in the evening from 6 to 9 p.m., as I recall, Eastern time. And there was this poll done by Rasmussen. Now, Rasmussen is the MAGA-aligned, Trump-aligned Republican polling organization. And they did a poll asking black people if they agreed with the statement, "It's okay to be white." Now, a lot of black people immediately recognized that as a slogan from the white racists. This has been a slogan from the neo-Nazis and white supremacists in the United States for about 2 decades. It's okay to be white. It's literally a meme, a trope, you know, it's something that they use to troll, you know, people of color with. And so many of the black Americans that Rasmussen surveyed said, no, I don't agree with that. That's a racist statement. But 53% agreed. Well, Scott Adams went nuts discovering that 47% of African Americans didn't agree with the statement, "It's okay to be white." And he goes on YouTube and he says, if nearly half of all blacks are not okay with white people, which, by the way, is not what they said. He says, that's a hate group. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Oh, black Americans are a hate group. How about that? Fascinating. He then goes on to say, I don't think it makes any sense as a white citizen of America to try to help black citizens anymore. There's no longer a rational impulse. So I'm going to back off on being helpful to black Americans because it doesn't seem like it pays off. And then he goes on to say, we need segregation now, segregation then, segregation forever. Whatever George Wallace's famous saying is, he basically says, and I quote, I would say, based on the current way things are going, the best advice I would give to white people is get the hell away from black people. Just get the F away, because there is no fixing this. He went on to say, I'm really sick of seeing video after video of black Americans beating up non-black Americans. He said, I see it every damn day, some black person beating the crap out of some white person. Really? This, again, is the kind of stuff, excrement, that comes out of these neo-Nazi platforms. The reality is most of the crimes against white people in America are committed by white people. Most of the crimes against black people in America are committed by black people. And black people do not disproportionately target white people any more than, well, actually the other way around, actually. White people do target black people. But, you know, Scott, this is what he was ranting about. And now that he has been canceled from hundreds of newspapers across the country, including ours here in Oregon, the Oregonian, and good on them, now he's claiming that he's the victim of cancel culture. And I just want to be on the record agreeing with my buddy Dean Obeidallah. This is not cancel culture. This is accountability culture. Scott Adams is being held accountable for his racist remarks. It's just that simple. And to have anybody, and by the way, he's whining about his loss of income. The guy's worth $75 million. I mean, maybe it's time to just retire. Go live on a cruise ship. Get the hell away from the rest of us. It's 27 minutes past. Yeah, let me know what ship you're on so I can avoid it. 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls on the other side of this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by John Pavlovitz. It's titled, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans. This is from the introduction titled, You Had One Job. If you want a good laugh, Google the phrase, you had one job. The results are hilariously tragic parade of seemingly impossible fails, unfathomably poor planning, and face-palming, inducing human error. A piece of melted cheese on top of a fast food burger bun. The word stop misspelled on a street crossing. A keep to the right sign with its arrow facing left. A toilet lid inexplicably installed below the seat itself. It's strange stuff. Seeing these stupefying train wrecks and task execution tends to elicit two responses. Usually making you feel a little bit better about yourself while simultaneously wanting to track down the culprits in an effort to understand how they managed to neglect the primary duty assigned to them. We begin to speculate. Were they temporarily distracted? Did they not properly comprehend the instructions? Did they feel as though someone above them in the chain of command dropped the ball? Were they just plain lazy? When people miss the point so spectacularly, we want to know how and why. Because that kind of failure feels impossible from the outside. It seems unfathomable to get the main thing wrong, and seeing it happen sparks our curiosity. I imagine Jesus knows well the curiosity that comes with watching people give clear direction lose their way. As a longtime Christian by aspiration, if not always in practice, I often envision an exasperated Jesus coming back and the first words out of his mouth to his followers as his feet hit the pavement being, You had one job, love. So what happened? I wonder what massive wave of excuses and rationalizations would come flooding from the mouths of the faithful multitude in front of him, how they might justify their mistreatment of the assailed humanity in their care, the verbal and theological gymnastics they'd attempt to avoid culpability for their own cruelty. Would they stridently recite him a verse from Leviticus? Would they blame the liberal media for morally corrupting America? Would they talk about people's wicked lifestyle choices? Would they argue that they were loving the sinners in their midst, but simply hating their sin? Would they frantically offer up the same platitudes and parrot back the same partisan talking points that they've gotten used to brandishing on social media and proffering in Sunday school classes? And if all else failed to convince him, would they quote Jesus to himself in a desperate Hail Mary effort to pass the buck to him for what they did or failed to do while supposedly standing up for him? And there, fully seen in the piercing gaze of the namesake of their very faith tradition, with all their justifications and excuses exhausted and only their fully exposed hearts left, would any of their responses be sufficient reasons for refusing to love, when that was the singular task and primary commandment that he left them responsible for tending to? In my less compassionate moments, I admit that I like to picture it not going well for them. I know it's far less than admirable, let alone Christ-like. But some days my heart strangely warms at the possibility of a few billion brimstone-breathing evangelists, sanctimonious conservative politicians, and plank-eyed judgmental Christian neighbors all having to explain themselves in a sanctified flop-swept moment they can't exegete or gaslight themselves out of, and they all get what they have coming to them. But my self-righteous revelry doesn't last long. The mirror calls me out as I remember what I think I know about Jesus, and that rescues me from full-blown, unabated hubris. I begin to wonder what my excuses might be, how I'd spin the enmity I manufacture here, what story I'd come up with for not doing the one task we both know compromises a disciple's job description. And if I really believe what I'm supposed to believe, are any of my justifications sufficient? If God is love, and if Jesus is the perfect expression of that love, and if I'm supposedly trying to follow that Jesus, how could I be so love-impaired so frequently? How do I miss the singular point so consistently? It's not as if I didn't know what I was signing up for, like some lengthy online user agreement I blindly accept in haste, missing the bombshell fine print underneath. Having read the Gospels a few million times, give or take a few 100,000, I know the primary commandment is not something I need to excavate from cumbersome layers of foreign language translations and cultural mores of the time. Jesus himself clearly laid out the most important commandment for me and for everyone who's ever cracked open a Bible, and even most people who've never cracked open a Bible. And so we'd all understand what's being asked of us going in, so there would be no post-altar call buyer's remorse or deathbed claims of a sucker punch, bait and switch. Loving God and neighbor and self is the elemental stuff of Christian prayers, songs, T-shirts, and bumper stickers, and we know that. But as the master Morpheus said to protege Neo in the first and only truly great Matrix, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Love is the path that Jesus laid out for us. The book, John Pavlovitz's If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, finding a faith that makes us better people. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your podcast. The Hartmann Report is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. One of the things that has always baffled me is why, after the Mueller report, or after the Mueller investigation found that there were 10 explicit, prosecutable cases of Donald Trump committing violations of the law by obstructing justice, that when Merrick Garland came into office, he chose to ignore those. And now I think the statute of limitations has run out on them. I believe it was a 5-year statute of limitations. He had that first year, he could have prosecuted those. Why? Why is it that on October 30th, 2016, Harry Reid, then the head of the Senate Democrats and of the Senate, to Jim Comey, saying it's clear that you have in your possession information about the connection between Trump and Russia and are refusing to release it. Yet you rushed out this information that you were going to investigate Hillary Clinton, and there was no there. Why is this? There's a video with the entire letter from Harry Reid over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls on the issues of the day. Dan in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
The lady that called about the electric cars kind of got me my mind working. Tell her that if she's still listening, 2024 Corvette will have a hybrid. But
I think she might have a vintage Corvette, but
anyway. Well, anyways, the internal combustion engine. I always think that I'm an electric car guy, and they should have been around 20 years ago. But I also think the oil companies held the MPGs back on the internal combustion engine too. I remember when I was 18, I got my grandpa's 93 Park Avenue, and it got 27 miles to the gallon on the highway. A big sedan, you know, I loved it. And my parents in 2020 bought a Kia Soul, and on a sticker it said it got 35 miles to the gallon on the highway. And I'm like, in 30 years, all the better we can do is 6 miles to the gallon.
Well, here's the problem, Dan, with the potential energy that is locked up in hydrocarbon fuels by that is released by burning them, by breaking the bonds between the carbon and the hydrogen and oxygen. That potential energy is released primarily as heat. I mean, there's a certain amount of kinetic energy when you explode those things inside the combustion chamber, but there's this massive amount of heat that is generated because it's burning. And the heat is waste energy. It's lost energy, but it has to be, the car has to get rid of it. That's why you've got that whole, that's why you got a radiator and, all these systems. And in fact, if you get rid of that radiator, your car is in big trouble in about 30 seconds. With an electric car, there's no waste.
Right. I understand that, but I'm saying, how is it that in 30 years they couldn't come up with a better, or could get 6 more miles to the gallon out of a car?
Because I think they figured out how to. I think the combustion the product of combustion.
The Park Avenue had 30 more horsepower too.
Yeah. Well, it also probably didn't have a catalytic converter on it that slightly reduces gas mileage, but. The fact of the matter is, I think internal combustion engines go back to the mid 1800s. Mr. Diesel was inventing those things, in the 1860s or 1880s? I forget the year, but, they go back a long way. And I think probably by the 1940s or 50s or 60s, certainly, we had pretty much optimized. We had gotten all the kinetic energy we could get out of fossil fuels and had to figure out, new and novel ways to deal with the waste heat. Now with electric vehicles, virtually 100% of that energy that goes in is coming back out as kinetic energy, as motion.
I agree with you, Tom, but I just can't. Like, if I have a big block Chevelle with a carburetor on it, and if you press the throttle on it, you should see the amount of fuel that sprays down the carburetor.
Yeah.
And now the fuel injector is atomized, by a computer.
Right.
And
which was an improvement.
My Chevelle,
but it was only a 2 or 3 or 5 mile an hour, mile per gallon improvement, because again we had hit the boundaries of what was possible. Dan, I got to move along, but thank you for the conversation. It's a fascinating one. Patrick in Marietta, Georgia. Hey, Patrick, you're in. That's not Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, is it?
No, but it's still pretty.
I used to
red,
live in Marietta, and I know it used to be Newt's district. It was when I lived there. Anyhow, what's on your?
Well, it's not as bad as then, but actually, I called initially about your comments on the Ukrainian history, and but then you asked about the Supreme Court arguments, and I don't know if it's allowed, but if I could comment on both. But in terms of Ukraine, the argument for people who, on the right or left, who are against giving support is simply that we promised it to them under Bush, a Republican president. So if you're in favor of the U.S. keeping its commitments and as well in favor of non-nuclear proliferation, this is the cost. We promised we would support them, and 3 countries did, England, U.S., Russia. Just so happens Russia is the one breaking the agreement and attacking them now. But that simple reason is from the history that we promised them we would defend them. And so I think that could be an argument that appeals to people on the peace side of the right, on the left, and also the MAGA crowd, unless they're going to say that Bush was an illegitimate legitimate president.
Yeah.
But
well, actually, it was during Clinton. It was '94, I think, that the Budapest Accords were worked out. But in any case, yeah, we promised them that we would do this. The UK promised them that they would respect and defend the borders of Ukraine in exchange for Ukraine denuclearizing, and Russia promised them that. I mean, it's just it's not an argument. Okay, what was the thing about the Supreme Court, real quick?
Well, three different groups or three different arguments, you might say. One is actually the Missouri. Well, it's lawyers who are not acting somehow directly for the Missouri loan servicing entity, because that's a state entity in Missouri, and so they're saying if the federal government forgives all these loans, the state of Missouri is going to lose all money. But it's not direct Missouri entity that's suing. It's this group of lawyers somehow on behalf. It's still being challenged, but that is the entity.
Thank you for that.
Or the argument they're making. That's one side of it. And then another one is that because it's like so much money involved and touches so many million Americans, the Supreme Court, the conservative one, has developed this kind of large questions doctrine, which so such a big deal, such a large amount of money, affecting so many Americans, it has to be specifically done by Congress, not an agency rule.
Right.
And so, but then again, standing comes up because, well, then a congressperson should be suing, but I can't imagine any congressman in their district would really want to be suing.
Right, or the House of Representatives itself should be suing. Yeah, excellent points. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how the arguments go, Patrick. Have you been following them? Have they started yet?
Trying to and listening, trying, but that's and then there's a group of other students who claim, well, my loan is not still being held by the federal government. It's held by some commercial agency, even though it was issued under the student loan program. So if your loan is being held by a commercial entity, then you don't qualify.
Yeah. So this is really about ideology, though. I mean, this is Republicans saying that, if you borrowed money, you should pay it back, period, full stop. And there's nothing wrong with going in debt to go to college. And Democrats saying people shouldn't have to go into debt to go to college.
Exactly, and ignoring, exactly. Unless you're, a business got loan forgiveness under PPP or 08 under the rescue plans and so forth. But if you're a regular person, you gotta
I'm with
die.
you. Well, thank you, Patrick, for the information on standing on that. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. Rose in Chicago. Hey, Rose, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Being that for a long time you have spoken out about how the Democratic Party has been late to the game and trying to build out some kind of a media infrastructure, whether it's talk radio or whatever, to compete even barely with the Republicans. What do you think about the idea of using something simple like billboards to get the message out? Is that even possible?
Oh, yeah. And billboards
the billboards were probably owned by big money.
Most of the billboards in the country are owned by Clear Channel. Or were. They've changed their name a couple of times, but I think that Clear Channel itself got spun off just to be in the billboard business, because I'm still seeing billboards that say, owned by Clear Channel. But frankly, I don't. As of this moment, I don't know. A decade ago, I knew what was going on with that. But billboards are cheap and they're very effective. And I'm with you. I'd love to see an organization. The problem is raising the money. It's, on the Democratic side, it's the crisis, the challenge is always raising the money. There are so many Republican billionaires who don't want their taxes to go up that they will throw money at or who don't want their industries regulated, that they will throw, extraordinary amounts of money at Republican politicians or Republican political, postures and whatnot. That there's no corollary on the Democratic side.
I was going to say that, when you're driving your car through the country, if you're going on vacation and your two choices on the radio are right-wing talk radio or a religious channel, maybe this would be something to counter that. If there were, billboards along the way that gave, the message that, hey, the Democrats are trying to lower your prescription prices. Yeah. The Democrats are doing, or even better, the Republicans, like 100% of them voted against lowering insulin. 100% of them voted against this.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. The other challenge with billboards is that often billboards, they sell the really high profile, the billboards that you really want to get. Instead of selling month to month, they sell them annual or sometimes even multi-year contracts. And it can be hard to crack into those markets. But I think spot on, Rose. I think you've identified.
It seems like an untapped market.
I completely agree. And Americans live in their cars. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Rose, thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to WCPT. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for we the people. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Sean in Alexandria, Virginia. It's Alexandria, right?
Yeah, Alexandria.
Yeah. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Well, I had two things. One, I don't know if I was listening to your show yesterday or today. I was on the Free
Speech TV.
Yeah, so I think I might have been on yesterday's. But you were talking about charging stations at parking lots for grocery stores, restaurants. So I've felt for a long time like there's this huge missed opportunity for solar panels that could function as like a roof to cover your car and collect power, so that they could collect power on the parking lot, and then subsequently I guess you could charge your car.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Why not?
Yeah. And then another, I guess, statement. You, a couple days ago, you talked about why there's this rise in authoritarianism in the media or in the right, and that you tied it to billionaires and their buying of Rush Limbaugh and Fox News and right wing media. So I kind of agree with that, but you also were talking about today about the lack of upward mobility in America, and that leads to revolution. And so I agree with that too. And so I think a part that you miss, and you're probably going to disagree with me, but in race, there are less now, but it used to be affirmative action and all these things to promote Black people and Hispanic people and stuff. So if they were poor, there was a method up, a channel up, and white poor people don't have that channel. And so I think that's why a lot of them are
that's how a lot of white poor people are living in Appalachia and actually all across the United States. More white people are on welfare than Black people in this country.
I understand that, right? So my point is, those people are angry because they don't feel like they have a channel up, and they feel like other people are given a channel that are not white.
Yeah, I think it's. So I think though that's simple racism that you're identifying, Sean. That's
I don't think so. I think there's.
Well, let me rephrase that. When people have good jobs, there's a certain threshold. I call it the Maslow threshold, right? It's where your basic needs are covered, are paid for by your work. You earn enough that you can pay the rent, you can buy food, you can send your kids to school, you can take a vacation. There's, you could call it the middle class threshold. When people hit that point, I think a lot of the stuff starts to fall away. A lot of the anger, a lot of the racism, a lot of the it's them that's doing this to me, all that kind of stuff. I think it really starts to fall away, and I think that's a good thing, frankly.
Well, I agree with that, except I would say that Fox News and the right-wing media that's been able to stand up because of this dissatisfaction.
Yeah. They're fanning it regardless of demographics. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is why the former Prime Minister of Australia, wrote an op-ed titled "Rupert Murdoch is the cancer at the heart of Australian politics." Sean, thanks for the call. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Patrick in Seaside, California. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind?
I had an update of Ron DeSantis' blast from the past, but before I get to it, getting back to Scott Adams, in the late 90s, Norman Solomon released a small little booklet, a really tiny, thin book titled "The Trouble with Dilbert, How Corporate Culture Gets the Last Laugh" by Norman Solomon. But I have a blast from the past about Ron DeSantis. I just subscribed to Harper's Magazine and got the current edition. It's a red cover with the cover story is publishing on trial. But on pages 15 and 16, it's under the title "See No Evil." It's a conversation on a podcast, Eyes Left, between a former Iraq war veteran and a former Guantanamo Bay detainee. And the detainee says that Ron DeSantis in 2006 was there telling the prisoners, if you have any problems, if you have any complaints, come to me, I'll look out for you. And it was when they did the force feeding and broke the hunger strike, where they were basically, I don't know, maybe putting funnels in the prisoners' mouths and just force feeding them Ensure over and over again, where they were defecating themselves and vomiting. And there was Ron DeSantis. And one of them, maybe the guy himself, said, you said you'd protect us. You said you'd look out for us. He says, well, you should eat. And that Ron DeSantis was sitting there the whole time laughing and smiling. And I don't know if that's something that should get more coverage. I'm thinking the MAGA people it would just make them love him even more. But I'm wondering if it's in the current issue of Harper's, pages 15 and 16, under the title "See No Evil." I'm just wondering if that should get more coverage.
I think
at least independent voters.
Who's the author of that?
Well, it says it's a conversation. It says from a November discussion on the Eyes
who's
Left
the author of the
podcast.
piece in Harper's?
It's not. It's a conversation segment from a podcast between these two people.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. So this is just something that Harper's generically came up with, and it's a brief piece.
It says from a November discussion on the Eyes Left podcast between Mike Prisner, spelled Prysner, an Iraq war veteran, and Mansour Adiafi, a former detainee at Guantanamo Bay. It says conversation.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Evil,
but it's not.
16.
It is not part of an article that was written by somebody.
No, it's not an article. Okay. It's a segment of a conversation between the two of them from the Eyes Left podcast.
Fascinating stuff.
But yeah, he was there. DeSantis is just sitting there laughing and smiling. Well, you should eat.
Well, I subscribe to Harper's, so let me check it out. I'll see what they have to say. Patrick, thanks for the heads up on that. I appreciate it. Make a note of it. Jerry in Tomah, Wisconsin. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, thank you for taking my call. I'm trying to find out, your audience, and you are all pretty smart people and everything, but I'd like to know if McCarthy gave those tapes to Carlson, or if Carlson asked him for them. And in the long run, the way I look at this, McCarthy is a government employee, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a government employee gives away some secrets, which those camera spots would be, he should be up for, treason is when you're at war, but espionage, some kind of charge.
Well, at least theft of government property. I mean, those tapes are government property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know which one instigated that. I'll give you this, or will you give me that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
You know,
my sense of it, based on the one interview Kevin McCarthy did where he said, I promised I would do this, was that it was a promise he made to a fellow member of Congress. So the question then is, who was that member of Congress, and did they specify Tucker Carlson, or did they specify Fox News, and McCarthy chose Tucker because Tucker and McCarthy had kind of a on and off relationship, and this was McCarthy's attempt to suck up to Tucker Carlson. And I don't know the answer to any of those questions, but, I think it's reasonable speculation. Great stuff, Jerry. Thank you very much. Ken in Sheridan, Colorado. Hey, Ken, it says you disagree with me. About what?
Well, I'm going to hit you on the student loan, but first I want to thank you for having me on and let you know I'm no longer on Free Speech TV as I have lost my internet.
Uh-oh.
Because I can no longer afford it. And I'm on TuneIn Radio listening to KTRC in Santa Fe.
Oh, great. Yeah. Our oldest affiliate.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to hit you on the student loan relief and how it will only hurt the working poor.
Okay. Tell me.
It comes down to the fact that nobody is paid a salary or a wage, not net, not gross. They're paid a perceived and expected standard of living. And if they're living in a standard of living right now that pays off the student loans, they will work for a STEAM standard of living without the student loans. And the 1% are going to kick off inflation and recession until they weed out that money. And the only people that will take it on the chin are the working poor.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes, it does. Because they won't get any relief.
How does diminishing, the average student debt in the United States is around $45,000, $50,000. How does diminishing that by $10,000 kick off inflation that hurts working poor people?
Because they're working for a standard of living. If they're working for a standard of living,
I don't think most people work for a standard of living. Most people work for the wages that are available to them.
Huh?
Most people work for the wages available to them. I mean, somebody who's working at 7-Eleven would love to have a standard of living where they can afford to, buy a larger house and a brand new car, but they're not going to do it because the wage is not available to them.
And the reason is because you're paid a perceived standard of living.
No, you're paid what your employer believes the market defines as appropriate pay for that particular work. I mean, this is a marketplace issue. Ken, thanks. I don't follow your logic. I mean, maybe I'm missing something. It happens from time to time, but it just doesn't make sense to me. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let them get a gun with him. A legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest, but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, "backed them," the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, "regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation." When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, "important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing." This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, as you'll recall, welcome back, by the way, to the third hour of our program. As you'll recall, our opening rant yesterday, my opening rant yesterday was about mifepristone and the whole possible consequences of this judge in Texas deciding to rule. Basically, there's a variety of ways he could rule, but basically, making the drug unavailable to women who need it, both for miscarriage and for abortion. And this is a big deal. We still have not gotten the decision yet, but we're still waiting. On the line with us is the Senior Vice President of Moms Rising, Monifa Bandale. And momsrising.org is the website, and Moms Rising also the Twitter handle. Monifa, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us today. Tell us about who are the people who are actually seeking abortions in America? I think they're being broadly mischaracterized as irresponsible young women, by and large, and single young women, and how these attacks on reproductive rights are hurting people across the board, but in particular people who don't have access to good medical services and don't have a lot of cash.
Yeah, this is a really good question. There's a huge mythology out there about who seeks and needs abortions. The fact of the matter is that 6 out of the 10 people who seek abortions are actually already mothers. They're making decisions about their health. They're making decisions about their family economic security. They're making decisions about their education, their housing. All a huge amount of different issues come into play, as moms know, and as we know at Moms Rising, when you decide if and when you're going to have another child. And so this mischaracterization that's put out there is really helping to kind of like feed this narrative that somehow this is about a group of people who need to be more responsible, who are quote unquote irresponsible. But I also want to say that at Moms Rising, we of course believe that everyone who needs and wants to seek an abortion should have access to it, whether they're that mother trying to decide if she's healthy enough or financially stable enough to have a second or third or fourth child, as well as someone who is young and single, and whatever their circumstances are. Because we do know that not having access to this very important healthcare, because abortion is healthcare, has huge impacts, especially on communities of color and poor people.
Expand on that. How so?
Well, here's another big thing people don't know. The United States is actually the most dangerous place to give birth amongst wealthy nations. So when you line up all the developed nations who tout that they have infrastructure and they are living a quote unquote first world status, the United States ranks last in terms of being a safe place for a birthing person to bring a child into this world. We have the highest maternal mortality rate amongst all of those nations. And when you look at who is experiencing the most maternal mortality, which is death during birth, labor, and postpartum, or maternal morbidity, which is becoming close to dying or having some type of long-term health issue during birth, it is disproportionately Black women and Indigenous women. And I want to underscore that this is even after you control for things like wealth and income, education, and previous health conditions.
So this is purely a function of structural and institutional racism?
Absolutely. And it's compounded, right? Like it's sexism is why maternal health care is so poor in this country, compounded by the structural racism. So you have these huge racial disparities. And of course, class always plays an issue as well. That kind of sits on top of it. But what we are finding is that at the core, at the heart of this maternal mortality crisis that we're having in the United States, because guess what? The rates are going up since the pandemic began, is racism, structural racism. We receive stories from moms all over the country that talk about their experiences in labor and delivery. And so much of what is putting their lives at risk are things like being ignored, not being listened to, being treated callously and racist. And all of these things have these hugely negative and sadly deadly consequences.
Yeah, it truly is tragic. What is the, and in fact, I think it builds on the studies that have been done about, for example, painkillers in hospitals, that black people are less likely to have good pain management than white people. And this goes back to this perception or mythology or cruel mythology from slavery eras that people with dark skin don't feel pain.
That black people experience less pain.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the slavery era, like you said, but even recently, if you look back 10 years, this was still being taught in some medical schools, right? They still had the studies buried in the books that medical students had access to, that somehow black people experience less pain than white people. And in fact, we only recently are moving past a racist predictor around kidney function. You know, there was this mythology that black people had a different kind of kidney function from white people, and therefore black people were waiting longer who needed kidney transplants than white people because of these mythologies about the physiological makeup, right, of black bodies. So it goes back, but it's also recent, because as soon as you're teaching a medical student that black people have different kidney functions for some reason because of race, all other kinds of things can sit on that, like experiencing less pain. And then, of course, wrapped up in that is the criminology, how black people have been criminalized. And so when we even ask for pain medication, there's this idea that we're trying to get some more pain medication to sell it, or that there may be some other issue there. And we are up against so much. So you even see highly educated, wealthy black women like Serena Williams, that was a breakthrough story that we shared, experiencing racism while giving birth. And it literally jeopardizing her life.
Yeah, it's just, in a way it's astonishing, and in a way it's predictable. I mean, this is the consequence of that black people have faced in this country for 400 years. The lawsuit in Texas, I haven't heard anything out of this court. Do you know the status of this lawsuit, or are we all just waiting, for the next shoe to drop? And if so, what are the possible ways in which that shoe can drop, and what would the impacts of those be?
We're all on the edge of our seats, right? I mean, it's the issue around abortion access has been one dumpster fire after the other, right? Ever since Roe fell because of the Dobbs decision, and states one by one, the trigger states put abortion bans in place right away. And so it's been whack-a-mole. This judge in Texas should be issuing a decision any day now, or maybe even any minute now. And it would essentially try to ban access to abortion medication that people have been using for decades. Right. It's been safe safely by the FDA. Yep. Say that one more time.
I'm sorry. I was just agreeing with you. Keep going.
Yeah, and so it's going to impact not just people who live in the states that are trying to ban abortion. This will impact access to this medication that, again, has been to everyone in every state around the country who wants to do a self-medicated abortion. So this is huge. But what we do know is that when the decision comes, it will be appealed right away. And so we will have another chance to fight it out. Even if it comes down today, there's going to be many, many different phases to this court fight. And ultimately, though, if the people who have brought this lawsuit prevail, we will lose access to a very important medication.
Right, and this will force women back into surgical abortions, which forces them back onto sidewalks where these religious freaks can yell and scream and spit at them and photograph them and follow them home and get their license plate numbers and publicize their homes and their addresses and their phone numbers and things and essentially torment them. And in states like Texas, if a woman has left the state when she comes home, might have really terrible circumstances awaiting her, including a $10,000 fine.
And it's important to understand that wealthy women, have great means, will always be able to seek the services they need, right? Through private doctors, clinics, probably even access banned medications. This will disproportionately impact everyday folks, people of color, poor folks, people who can't who can't fly out of the country if they need to, right? To do what they have to do and come back, and not have it be something that's public, or like you said, not be stalked at a clinic. And I also wanted to underscore that we've already talked about maternal health and what bad outcomes and experiences that Black women and Indigenous women have in healthcare facilities. So driving women back into these same types of circumstances is also emotionally and mentally exhausting. It takes a toll on your health overall to constantly be put back into these systems and institutions that are racist.
Yeah, I view this as sadism. I think these people are sadists who want to push these women back into these circumstances. I think they delight in torturing these women, but I may be just totally nuts in that regard. Anyhow, Monifa, thank you so much for dropping by and speaking with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I do want to make one really quick point, which is that there's a direct connection between the maternal mortality rates in states that have a high maternal death rate and states that ban abortions. It's the same states. Thank you.
Monifa Bandale. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Sharon in Minneapolis. Hey, Sharon, thanks for listening on the Thom Hartmann app. What's on your mind today?
Thank you for taking my call. And I wanted to make some comments or some thoughts about Scott Adams.
Okay.
And his speech lately.
Yeah.
When the pandemic came around, that changed the workplace a lot. And so many people are working from home now.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott's deal was sarcasm in the workplace. He don't have any ideas anymore, I think, and it's fading.
Yeah.
He might be worth $75 millions of dollars now, but tomorrow he may not be. In the future, it could continue to decline. So where can you get some money from? Just like all these other celebrities that make all of these, look at Sean Hannity and all the money he's making because he's telling people things that he don't even believe. Right. And that might be Scott's deal.
So you think Scott is going to be the next right-wing media star? Is that, yeah, I mean, he's got a podcast that's apparently popular.
He may very well be. When
Amazing.
People had physical businesses and they were going down,
mm-hmm.
They would set a fire, collect from the insurance company. Well, he don't have that ability. So what does he do? He goes out and starts selling bigotry and all of that.
Yeah,
and he's collecting from the right wing.
Yeah, he's like a cultural arsonist. Sharon, excellent points. Thank you very much for calling and making them. Yeah, good talking to you. Thank you. Andy in Hoosick Falls, New York. Hey, Andy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Getting back to the rail derailment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm focusing on the issue of how the complaints have been lack of attention from the Department of Transportation and some of the bigwigs. And
yeah, Joe Manchin just came out and criticized Pete Buttigieg.
Right. And so I have personal experience in this. I've had, in the last 8 years, I've had 2 fatalities in 1 train separation. And this is in passenger service.
Are you
so
an engineer?
But there's a lot of... Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I work from Albany to New York City.
Okay, on Amtrak.
So So in the case, what happens is that in any incidents like this, and this rate is considerably higher because the EPA is involved, but in all my cases, local, regional, and even national news were involved. And it gets very convoluted. And in almost every single case, it's incorrect. And the first thing that happens is you have the first responders, police, fire, rescue. Then the union gets involved right off the bat. You have road foremen, train masters. We get carried away drug testing. In the case of the fatality, it was a coworker. Mm-hmm. So the NTSB got involved right away.
Right.
The Department of Transportation, they do what's called root cause analysis.
Right.
And they interview.
Andy, I've got 15 seconds. What's the bottom line here?
So the bottom line is that it's not about Pete Buttigieg. The departments are right there on the ground right off the bat. Mm-hmm. Pete Buttigieg is the head of that, but all the worker bees are all down there on the ground, and they are everywhere.
I think that's the point Joe Biden made yesterday in response to a reporter's question. He said we had people on the ground within 2 hours of the accident. I mean, but that's pretty damn fast. Andy, thank you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. I appreciate the call. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. Wendell Potter, he's been on the program many, many times. Former vice president at, was it Aetna? Sean, am I remembering right? It's one of the big, it might be Cigna. Yeah, I'm not certain. So one of the really big seven, health insurance companies, and in fact, he was in the marketing department. He really knows how they deal with this stuff, and he's published a new report. He's got a Substack newsletter, by the way. I just started recommending it today, that you can easily find, and his new report, and this is absolutely fascinating, is that 90% of the revenue at Humana, Centene, and Molina, three of the big health insurance companies, are coming from government programs, specifically Medicare and Medicaid. A lot of states are hiring these giant insurance companies to administer their Medicaid programs. And of course, the insurance companies skim money off the top in exchange for doing that. There's a cost to do that, which is not unreasonable. And then you've got privatized Medicare, which is called Medicare Advantage. It actually should be called private health insurance for people over 65. And but those two things are constituting 90% of the revenue for many of these companies. Over the past decade, Potter found the 7 top for-profit insurance companies in the U.S., Humana, Centene, Molina, United Health, Cigna, CVS, Aetna, and Elevance, have seen their combined revenues from taxpayer-backed programs soar. Now, keep in mind, this is just in the last 10 years, soar by 500%. In 2012, it was $116 billion a year these 7 companies were making. Now it's $577 billion a year. So they've added over $440 billion a year in revenue to what they're doing. He also says the big 7 now control more than 70% of the privatized Medicare market. That's the Medicare Advantage market. Pramila Jayapal, in response to this, the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and also a regular guest on this program, she represents Washington, part of Washington State near Seattle. She said, we must fight the privatization of Medicare with every tool we have. Amen. And Mark Pocan and Ro Khanna have introduced legislation, the Save Medicare Act, to the House of Representatives, to prevent health insurance companies from using the word Medicare in their advertising or in branding their products, which I think is pretty damn important. But these companies now, they're going to rake in $600 billion this year, and skimming a few $1 million off the top of that to hand to a bunch of Republican politicians to keep the situation, the status quo, or even get those Republicans reelected so they can maintain the status quo. That's chump change. I mean, I just fully expect that we're going to see the insurance industry basically fighting back on all this. So anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Dave in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Well, I heard your little rant about Merrick Garland, and I kind of agree with you. There's a book by Jesse Eisinger. Maybe you've read it, or maybe you know about it. It's called I can't say the word, but it's the Chicken Excrement Club.
Oh yeah, he's been on the guest. He's been a guest on our program.
Oh, has it?
Yeah.
Okay,
In fact, we've got a book report
this.
in circulation of his book also, where I read the first chapter. Yeah.
I've read it. Well, I remember that. Well, you probably read the chapter that I'm going to refer to, and it goes back to the days when Comey was in the FBI, and he was in front of a bunch of newbies at the in the FBI, and asking them questions. And he asked them, for instance, how many of you have never lost a case? And all kinds of hands went up. And he said, well, welcome to the Chicken Excrement Club.
Uh-huh.
And there, I imagine,
because they were not taking on cases where there was risk? Is that what you mean?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And
so you think that's what Garland is doing and not going after Trump?
Yeah, he's late to the party, and there's a lot of people I've been listening to that think the same thing as I do.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Swalwell, Adam Schiff, Neil Katyal, who's argued before the Supreme Court, and several others. And, of course, he's hired Jack Smith now, I guess, which is a step in the right direction, but all he's doing is ceding power to the guy. And
maybe that's
he should have been in the game.
I'm with you. He should have been in the game from the get-go. I mean, you had Michael Cohen going to prison for 3 years for delivering a check that Donald Trump signed and ordered him to deliver. Why wasn't Donald Trump arrested the day he was no longer president? Why wasn't on January 21st he served with an arrest warrant? I don't get it. Or at least a week later. I mean, I just don't get it. Why are they not prosecuting him for that right now? It's literally a crime for which his lawyer went to prison. Dave, thank you. I'm in. We'll be back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where smart people get their news. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. 27 minutes past the hour. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it. But for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not. But fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million, 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation.
The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin can prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, "I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe," end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, for, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device,
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Just some amazing stuff going on over on Fox News. Megan Lapp and David Stevenson have been regular guests across Fox News, and they're claiming to be all worried about whales, all these whales that are dying off the east coast of the United States, arguing that these are the result of the windmills that are out there, right? The ocean wind and the work done to install them. Well, it turns out that Lapp works for an organization whose largest donor is Charles Koch. Whose largest donor is the Texas Public Policy Foundation that gets their money from Charles Koch. And Stevenson works for a group whose largest donor, the Caesar Rodney Institute, is the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. So if you have friends who are watching Fox News and they're concerned about the whales, you might want to let them know what's going on. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Hey, welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls today. Win in Solon, Maine. Hey, Win, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I've been listening to you quite a bit, of course, but I'm concerned about what you're trying to do with your car, backfeeding your panel and whatnot.
Okay.
Has anybody ever advised you about wattage?
Well, I know what wattage is.
Okay, yeah, it's amperage multiplied by voltage, right?
W equals EI.
Right. So, what sounds like what you got is like a dime store inverter there, right? That you're plugging into at 15 amps.
What I've got is a device that is specifically made for my car that you plug into the charging port, and on the back end of it is a 110-volt outlet. But yeah, I'd bet you almost anything inside of it is basically just a digital inverter that's converting the DC from the car to the AC, 115 volt AC.
It's a direct link to your batteries.
Right.
But do you know the wattage coming out of that?
It's 15 amps, so it'd be 1,500 watts roughly.
That's not the wattage.
Well, the wattage would be, 110 times 15.
It's not going to be much.
Slightly over 1,500 watts.
It's something that, you could probably charge your cell phone with or run
1,500 watts is a fair amount of juice. That, my television, I know, is consuming about, the screen is consuming about 130 watts. The little Apple TV thing itself is consuming about 30 watts. Right. My plan is to go around. First of all, it'll only light up one side of my breaker panel. And I know which outlets those are. So I want to make sure that
you want to tap into one side. Absolutely.
So I want to make sure that all the things on that breaker panel that are big current draws, like a water heater or whatever, those breakers are just turned off. They're closed. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, go around the house and make sure that all the appliances that are plugged in that might have surges are like a toaster, are no longer plugged in, just in case somebody decided to try to use one. What I'm trying to do basically is power my TV, my internet router, and my computers. And all of those in aggregate are far less than 1 kilowatt, less than 1,000 watts. And so if I'm just careful about that, I think I can do it.
But, yeah, in theory, but you're going to have quite a drop in voltage and whatnot once you start feeding that into your panel.
Why?
So listen to my advice here for a little bit. What I would do if I were you, Tom, and I think you would be, do you do well to do this? And what I would do for a customer, I would find an inverter from like an old, Winnebago, for instance, because they run 110, right?
Right.
And I would use that instead of whatever they incorporated into that power cord. Because what you have there, you may well smoke something. I would not depend on that. Yeah. If I was to do this for a customer, that's what I would do.
Okay. Well, the car also has in the car, in the back seat of the car, there is a 110-volt outlet that's also rated at 15 amps and that is running off a separate inverter within the car.
Correct. But that's for charging cell phones, maybe trickle charge your laptop.
It's still 15 amps. It's still 1,500 watts. I mean, that's still a hell of a lot of juice.
You're not going to plug everything that you just mentioned to me into that. I wouldn't do that.
I think I could. I mean, if it's less than a kilowatt and the thing is rated at 1.5 kilowatts, why not?
Well, I'll tell you, take an inverter that's meant for like a Winnebago, for instance.
Right. But you'd have to have a 12-volt source for that. And the battery in my car, I think, is probably 80. I think the electric car batteries these days are like 80 volts or something. They're in that neighborhood. Although my car is built on an 800-volt frame, I don't know much about the inner workings of the cars. I know that some of the other cars we looked at a Toyota EV and it was on a 400-volt frame, so it takes twice as long to charge. But I don't know exactly what that means. Wayne, I got to move along, but thanks for the advice. I appreciate it. It's good to hear from an electrician.
I would really look at that, Tom. You don't want to smoke stuff.
I agree. I will be very careful. Wayne, thank you and hopefully I'll never have to do it. I mean, we haven't lost power this year. Michelle in Fulton, Missouri. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for what you do.
Thank you.
I have two comments. As far as the student loan forgiveness, we have teacher shortage, cops shortage, social workers. So, people coming out of college can't take those lower paying jobs. They have to go somewhere else. And if their loan
because of their student loans, you mean?
Yeah. They have to take a higher pay job. And they may just, hate it, sell insurance, whatever it is.
Right.
And if they come out of college and owe nothing or very little, they can go into, maybe their passion is social work, maybe their passion is teaching. And so then, I'm for the forgiveness. Right. I mean, I had a student loan, and part of it was forgiven. And my second thing is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Why don't we stop talking about her? I mean, we got Trump as president because nobody can leave him alone.
I can tell why we can't. I can tell you why we can't stop talking about her. If you're having dinner in your house and a boa constrictor starts slithering across the floor, you're going to notice it, right? You're going to start paying attention to it. You have no choice. It's a threat or a potential threat. And that's why we have to, I believe, pay attention to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump and the rest of these whack jobs, because they genuinely want to destroy this country. They genuinely want to turn us into an oligarchy and an autocracy.
I mean, I think with Greene, cover the stuff she says, not all the ignorance,
Yeah.
Other stuff in its background noise.
I get it. And the other thing is that, on this little show, I'm not going to make or break her career, but,
Absolutely.
But I was watching Ron DeSantis. I was, I monitor MSNBC here in the studio. I've got a little TV on, and I'm watching it on Hulu right now. And they were doing a fairly lengthy piece about Ron DeSantis has a new book out. And I'm like, why are you doing this? I'm not sure that's newsworthy. It's, Ron DeSantis wants to trash more gay people. That's newsworthy because it's part of his campaign to destroy America. But he's got a book out. You're going to help him sell his book, really?
Front page probably.
I get it, Michelle. I get it. Michelle, thank you for the call. Spot on. Richard in Bellflower, California. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Hey, Tom, please explain to me why Rand Paul is still harassing Dr. Fauci.
Because it's his thing. Rand Paul is a pretend doctor. He went to medical school and became an ophthalmologist, but he never got certified by any of the real boards, so he created his own board to certify himself, but doesn't practice. The guy is weird. I mean, his father was weird. It's like a whole family of people who are famous for being famous. The eccentric is their brand, and trashing Fauci is there's a certain constituency for it. That's what Rand Paul is playing to.
God, it's just so sad.
It really is. It really is, and it's not a good thing for America either. Richard, thank you. Ventura in Cypress, California. Hey, Ventura, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I'm going to talk to you about Medicare Advantage. I've heard your rants against it, and so I kind of reevaluated my selection of that. And if I were to drop Medicare, I would have to buy Medigap. So Medicare only covers about 65-70% of medical care. Now you have to buy
it covers 80% of it covers everything with regard to hospitalization and things. It covers 80% of your doctor's offices and small procedures and stuff.
Okay, but then I have to buy Medigap because 20% of my wife was in and passed away in the hospital, and it was going to be about $1 million.
Right. Yeah, you have to buy a Medigap policy. Absolutely. No, it's for low-income people. There are many low-income people who basically can't afford Medicare. I mean, because Medicare payments and the Medigap payments. You take the Medicare out of your Social Security and you pay for the Medigap, and together those represent a large expense.
Even when you have the Medigap, they don't pay the 100% of what's left. They only pay maybe 90%.
Depends on the plan you got. My plan pays 100%. Okay. I haven't paid a medical bill. I haven't paid a copay. I haven't paid anything in the 7 years now that I've been on Medicare, and had a Medigap policy, I've not written one single check or given anybody a credit card all that time. Because I've got a Medigap policy that covers absolutely everything. And, those are out there. I mean, it's a little more expensive. I can afford a little more expensive policy. But it's not that much more. I mean, it's a couple $100 a month. But, I get it. We need to reform Medicare so that Medicare covers everybody in the country and has no deductibles. We need to do like, a lot of other developed countries do. But we haven't, sadly. But I don't think Medicare Advantage is the solution. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hours. It's the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, don't think so. Supreme Court is wrong on that one. And welcome back, Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Well, speaking of is Walmart a person, in Houghton, Michigan, Walmart got up to our area. They had the land donated to them so that they could build where they wanted to and have an expansive store. And at the time, they made a development agreement to pay taxes. And now, all these years, they are trying to bring their tax base down by 60% and make Houghton pay back $1.1 million, which will really mess up our community. It's going to take away from everything, every program, fire departments, police, roads,
but hey,
everything.
Denise, the richest family in America, the Walton family, worth tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, they need more money.
Right. Well, I called my representatives, and they told me that there was a representative downstate that was on the appropriations committee, and she wouldn't bring it to the floor. So I called her, and then I talked to the city manager, and the city of Houghton, which has Michigan Tech, and we're a struggling community, but we've been struggling since the 60s.
Yeah, I've been there.
And now Walmart is trying to take all this money from us, and I guess we are taking them to federal court for trying to go back on their development agreement to pay the taxes that they do pay.
That's amazing.
So it's just insane what they're trying to do up here. And, they've already destroyed, there's nowhere left to shop up here. Penny's is gone. Shopko is gone. They've just destroyed so many small-town businesses, and they just don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wanted to tell you that's going on up here, and it's been going on in many little rural areas where they got their foot in the door.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy. I'm going to be writing about this tomorrow on Hartmann Report. Actually, I started writing this yesterday afternoon. That this is an outgrowth of Ronald Reagan in 1983 suspending the enforcement, directing the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice to stop enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act. And I mean, it used to be that we protected small businesses, but now if you look at Main Street, small town Main Street America, you don't see the local family-owned businesses anymore. You see these giant chains. And if you look at the malls, I back in the 70s and 80s when they first started building strip malls, and in the 80s when they started doing the experience malls, the covered malls, they were all local companies. They were all, the local jeweler and the local clothing store and the local furniture store, and now it's all big national chains. It's just they've all been wiped out, and this is the result of a policy that was imposed on the United States by a Republican administration, very intentionally, for the purposes of making the rich richer and basically screwing small businesses. And they've been very successful. And I think Houghton and Calumet and all, those kind of towns in the northern part of Michigan, all across the country actually are perfect examples of it. Denise, I'm so sorry to hear about your town's conflict, or the next town over's conflict there with Walmart, but Geez, keep the
We're
keep
all
the
one
faith. Good luck.
community up here.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah,
good luck. Thanks for the call, Denise. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag You're It. So you don't think generally of community gardening and cancer and heart disease prevention in the same thought, in the same sentence. But sure enough, this was published in the journal Lancet Planetary Health, a study that was funded by the American Cancer Society, the first ever randomized control trial of the effects of community gardening. And what they did was they started a garden. This was in Denver. It was 291 non-gardening adults, average age 41. And they gave them half of the group. They gave them a garden plot and some seeds and seedlings and an introductory gardening course. And what they found was by the fall that those people who were doing the gardening had increased their fiber consumption by 1.4 grams a day, 7%, which is substantial. And they believe that this will help them with everything from diabetes to certain cancers. It's absolutely a fascinating study. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Was that loud? welcome back. That's poppy music. That really popped up there. Bang, right in my ear. I'm not complaining. Okay, picking up your phone calls here. Michelle in Boston, Massachusetts. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller. Love your show. Thank you for everything. I wanted to share that I was in Connecticut last week, had met this retired insurance agent that was now picking up a gig, I would call it, selling Medicare Advantage and boasting to me how he was making $1,400 for every person he signed up for Medicaid Advantage, and that he was taking in about $8,000 or $9,000 a week.
Wow. Yeah, there's a hell of a lot of money in privatized Medicare, but that's interesting. That's the first time I've heard, what the bounty is for making a sale. $1,400. And if he's making the $1,400, imagine what his employer's making.
That's right. And how, I tried to engage in a conversation, but, capitalism speaks louder than any ethics or morals.
Yeah, no, you're not, what was it, Samuel Johnson back in the day, talking about, or was it Mark Twain? I don't recall the famous quote about, you can't argue with a man when his income is at stake. I'm not even remembering the quote right, but you get the point. You're absolutely right. Michelle, thank you.
I definitely get the point. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. I much appreciate it. Matt in Chicago. Hey, Matt, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wish the Democrats and Republicans could come together and compromise on something. Obviously, when Social Security rolled out in 1935, the life expectancy was 65 years of age. So they expected you to be dead before you could actually collect.
Well, no, that's not actually true. A lot of people were living into their 70s, 80s, and 90s in 1935. The reason life expectancy, there's two reasons life expectancy has gone up. The minor one is that people are not smoking as much and they're living a healthier lifestyle and all that sort of thing. That's added probably 3 years, 4 years to life expectancy. The big one that has accounted for decades of increase in life expectancy since that era is the loss of child mortality. I mean, it used to be that, 1 out of every 4 or 5 kids just didn't make it to their teenage years. Kids died of all kinds of things. Women died in childbirth. I mean, there were all kinds of problems that were hitting young people. And so, somebody dies when they're 2 years old and somebody else lives to 100. What's the average age between the two of them? 50.
Right. I don't want to debate that. Like, the reality is people are living longer, but at the same time, it needs to be raised as well as the cap removed so that we can actually fund the people who are on it.
I agree.
The fact that the rich people aren't, after 137,000, aren't paying another dime up to, they could make another $10 million and not pay another dime into Social Security. And if we remove that cap, it's solvent.
You're right.
So
it's not just solvent. You can give everybody a raise.
Right. Well, obviously the life expectancy is going to continue to go up, I think. And then we can start tackling Medicare all at some point. But I don't think that we can't chew gum and walk at the same time, but we've got to get one thing in order before we start tackling every progressive thing that we want. And I think we can compromise on by lifting the age a little bit.
Well, and this is one of the things that is not, that Republicans can't say, oh, he's a wild-eyed liberal wanting to give everything away. Just saying, hey, why is it that somebody who makes $1 million a year pays, a fraction, of the income tax for Social Security that somebody who makes, $40,000 a year? It just doesn't make any sense. Mike, Matt.
And I can tell I don't make $2 million a year, but I can tell you that I don't notice it in my paycheck. Yeah. When I hit that 37, I don't notice that I'm making more money. So people making $2 million are certainly not going to notice that in their paycheck.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you very much, Matt. Mike in Los Angeles. Hey, Mike, I only have about a half a minute here. You got a quick one?
No, not really that quick, but I wanted to comment on the insurance companies making all the money. And I personally had an issue with a very expensive medication I'm on and a copay assist program. And I was paying for my medication to the tune of $5,000. And lo and behold, come to find out that the insurance company took my money and the copay assist money. And the only reason I found out, because the next time I had to refill the prescription, my claim for the copay assist got rejected. Amazing.
So they cut a deal with the pharmaceutical company, and then they're hitting you for full retail on the copay. These guys they got no morals at all. Mike, thank you for the call. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, and stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3